Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and this is the Eve Universe Show! Alright, let's start with Theodicy. I don't even know if we're going to get all the way through Theodicy. We're going to be reading it. Let's introduce it real quick. So Theodicy is a rather long story. It's 169 pages, as it is. And it also... So, the writer of Theodicy is the same author as the Empyrean Age and Templar 1. So I actually think that Theodicy can, and more importantly should, be viewed as being kind of the first in that trilogy, right? So it goes Theodicy, Empyrean Age, Templar 1, right? Hold on. There we go. So this is actually kind of an important story, but not a lot of people know about it. Everybody kind of knows about the Templar 1, and everybody knows about Empyrean Age and all that kind of stuff, and even like Inheritance. But Theodicy kind of gets left out. So I've been wanting to do this for a while. Nice. This story takes place before... really before even the events of Concord, right? So this is over 100 years ago. All right. A little bit of backstory. The Minmatar have leaders that are known as elders, and the elders are supposedly the original elders, like the progenitors of their different clans, that developed the method called the Talrog form, where that allows them to pass from body to body, kind of like the Intaki, but in a much more like literal way. And these are kind of like the secret leaders of the Minmatar. However, especially during the Amar occupation, they were scattered. And so at this point, there was a couple of elders that were found in a specific station of an Amar facility. I give to you the destiny of faith, and you will bring its message to every planet of every star in the heavens. Go forth, conquer in my name, and reclaim that which I have given. The Book of Reclaiming, 2213, the Scriptures. And so we watched, those of us who survived, from afar as our home world burned and the legions of evil marched before their sign, herding our people like so much cattle into transports. A life of slavery awaited those cursed souls. It would have been better for them to have never been born. How, dear God, did it come to this? Were these invaders not flesh and bone like us? What evil is this that compels men to commit such horrors against each other? Sebaster Tribe Chronicles, Minmatar Archives, The Path of Krogan. Derelict Region, Aga Constellation, the Hayil System, Daemon Planetesimal, Daemon Mining Complex. 23-2-16 AD. A normal man would have screamed at the scorching agony unleashed by the shock whip. Instead, the slave merely picked up his mining laser off the ground and switched it back on, continuing his work as though nothing had happened. The Amarian guard, staring at the fresh wounds on the man's back, considered delivering a second blow. A slave numb to pain was difficult to control, and besides, replacements were due to arrive at any moment should this one perish. The Reclaiming had conquered the planet Iana yesterday, and hundreds of thousands of repentant pagans were taken prisoner. Those heathens who refused to embrace the faith were dealt swift justice by the Emperor's holy paladins. The guard wound his arm back and struck again. Sparks exploded from the slave's back, and this time he crumpled to the ground in a heap. The cauterized wounds intersected the previous mark, creating an approximate visage of the sign. The beauty of the faith, the guard thought, is that it offers a path for the unborn. Paradise was the exclusive birthright of pure-blooded Amarians, but for all others, including the Matari wretch lying at his feet, salvation had to be earned. Only through suffering can the unborn rise from the shadow of death to gain the blessing of immortality. I might yet walk in heaven with this one, the guard thought. His subservience speaks mountains of his quest for forgiveness. Just as his arm drew back to strike a third time, the guard's earpiece squawked. A slave transport was about to land, and he was to assist in the processing of new arrivals. There were glaive collars to be fitted, labor tasks to be assigned, and mining equipment to be issued. He looked downward at the slave, now crawling along the dirt and gravel. Yes, this one shall see paradise soon enough. Sheathing the shock whip, the guard turned and started back towards the section's lifts. Reaching across the cavern walls for support, the slave struggled to pull himself back to his feet. Waves of excruciating pain pulsed through his wiry frame, as he was terrified of each surge, not for physical torment, but for the cruel reminder that death continued to elude him. If there was a time in this man's life that was not plagued by anguish, then its memory had long since been lost. Besides pain, all he knew was that he was damned for his crime of not being Amarian by birth, and that the equipment now in his hands were the key to his salvation. The escape from hell lies beyond these walls, the paladin had told them. Use the laser to burrow through them, saving the hemerphite that the cavern yields as an offering to God. Switching the device on, he plunged the laser into the rock before him, working the beam from left to right, searching for the precious ore and praying for forgiveness. A searing heat erupted from the mysterious device that until now had been laid dormant inside of the slave's stomach. The pain swelled suddenly and then exploded in all directions at once. The mining drill fell to the ground as the slave clutched his abdomen and dropped to his knees. Then a second source of scathing heat originated from deep inside his skull, as if molten metal was injected behind his eyes. Writhing on the ground in convulsion, he could feel the scalding liquid course through his bloodstream, incinerating everything in his path. At the peak of his agony, a blinding flash overwhelmed the slave's vision. He unleashed a deafening scream, and its fervent pitch camarned through the pits and catacombs of the mine. But the reverberation assaulting the eardrums of countless slaves was not the shriek of a man in pain. It was the fiery shrill of the battlefield war cry. The fire that flowed through his veins had become the source of pure, exhilarating strength. Rising to his feet, the slave patted his skull and stomach down for wounds, but found none. He knew that he was just transformed into something inhuman, something stronger and more powerful than he could ever imagine. His hands latched firmly onto the glaive collar, gripping his neck. Immediately, he could feel the device puncture his skin and inject the lethal toxins into his artery, but the poisons that should have crippled him and then killed him had no effect. With a sharp metallic crack, the collar shattered from sheer strength of the man's hands. Slaves gathered and watched in amazement as he removed the broken syringe needles from his neck and cast them harmlessly aside. Now keenly aware of his powers, he heard the voice of someone he had never met, but commanded his devout, absolute obedience. "Awaken, Mimitar! They have our elders." The slave had shook his head in despair, clutching his own skull as though it had been about to break apart. There was immediate clarity of purpose in his life. The voice came from inside, but he knew it was born from a single mission. "They have taken them here, Mimitar. They are hidden among those who have just arrived." Immediately, he felt the presence of the elders nearby and knew that the voice was truthful. His memory reached back in time to the exact moment when the Amarian guards was poised to strike him a third time, to the radio squawking in his earpiece. The slave mind amplified the sound, processing his words, and learned that in that instance that the elders were being held in the landing bay just beyond the mines. "You must go to them now." The urgency of his voice betrayed the presence of the shockwhip's charged lance screaming across towards his back. Time slowed down to a crawl. Sidestepping the whip, he pivoted on one foot towards his attacker and lunged with an outstretched arm in a single blurred motion. The slave felt his own tightened hand rip through the throat of his assailant. The Amarian guard fell, life spraying through the gruesome wound of his neck. No time was wasted savoring the delicious moment of revenge. Instead, the slave turned and started to run. The inspired crowd, recognizing this opportunity, erupted into frenzy and ran after him. "Hurry, Mimitar! Time runs out for us all." 3 more guards died instant, violent deaths as they tried to stop the rogue slave. Behind him, the crowd had grown to an uncomfortable riot. Shedding their mining drills and running blindly onward, the mob sought Amarian blood to spill, but found only the mangled remains left by the powerful one who had gone ahead. Reaching the great doors of the landing bay, the slave crushed the sternum of his next victim with a single strike. The radio on the corpse announced a terse warning. "His glaive collar has been removed. Disperse rifles to your squads and fire at will. Open the doors, Mimitar." In a whirl of motions, he pressed the dead man's palm against the glass console and typed a 5-digit sequence. The slave never considered how he might have possibly known what the code was. The mighty doors opened, and there before him stood hundreds of Mimitar men, women, and children. The elders were amongst them. "Come to us, Mimitar." A bolt of fire slammed into his chest with a terrific force. The sound of the shot caused the crowd to scream in panic. Feeling no pain, he took another step forward. Again, another powerful impact pushed him backwards. But instead of falling into his own space, he was swept forward into the wrathful crowd of rioting slaves rushed past. Staggering through the fray, the slave ignored the madness, desperately seeking the elders who had summoned him from his sleep. Death was everywhere, but his eyes locked onto the frail figure of a hooded man moving a slow, ethereal glide through the struggle. Everything hangs in the balance. The destiny of worlds rests in the outcome of these days. Warn the others that the remaining elders must not perish. Send this message with haste. Immortality awaits. Mimitar, go! And the slave could feel pain again, but not from the bullet wounds in his chest, but the searing torture originating from the pit of his stomach returned. And the elder disappeared into the chaos. Suddenly aware of its own mortality, the slave broke through towards the lifts that would take him to the surveillance posts at the surface of the mines. He ran through crowds with flashing knives and spilt blood, past men clutching at their glaive collars with one hand and bashing Amarians with the other. With abdominal pain intensifying every step, he hurled himself into the lift and shut the door. The elevator began rocketing upward amidst a hail of bullets. Guards filled into the second lift and gave chase. The pain spread upwards through his solar plexus, and tinges of agony began radiating through the gaping wounds of his chest and back. A computerized voice announced a warning that the lift shot past the gravity zone. Then came the nausea, and in a violent heave dotted with blood and serum, a small metallic sphere was forcibly expelled from his mouth just as the lift stopped. Summoning as much strength as he could from his final effort, the slave grabbed the tiny device and pulled himself out. Bullets scorched overhead as he bounded towards the airlock entrance. The inner doors opened, and with the press of several keys, he ensured that they would not close behind him. Air pressure alerts echoes throughout the cavern. Amber-colored warning lights flashed, and sirens wailed as he waited for the exact moment to open the outer seal. The slave heard a deafening whoosh, then silence. As his lung imploded, his last image to be processed by his failing brain was the sight of Amarian guards hurled through the opening of the in the surface below. The tiny device, encased in the death grip of the nameless slave, flashed once before converting every atom of its mass into an immensely powerful energy pulse that traversed light years of space-time in an instant. So what's interesting about that, what I just pulled it from that, is that if you notice, a flash of light that is traversed light years of space-time in an instant. So the only other time that we've seen light traveling faster than light in a notable way in the EVE universe is during the Caroline Star event. The celestial event registered on the instruments of exactly 4 ships. In that single moment, the course of history was altered forever. I will not hesitate when the test of faith finds me, for only the strongest conviction will open the gates of paradise. My faith in you is absolute. My sword is yours. My faith is absolute. My sword is yours, my God, and your will guides me now and for all of eternity. The Prophet Kuriya, Paladin's Creed. It is said that cowardice lurks behind power, and that every tyrant ruler fears the day in which his subjects learn where the source of real power lies. What better way for an emperor to hide that truth than by claiming the will of deities and threatening divine consequence to those who question it? The Elder Tome, Matari Chronicles. Yes, light travels as fast as it can, right? It doesn't interact with mass, so that's why it's the speed limit. Not because there's something special about light that makes it go that fast, but rather it is the fastest that something can go in our universe as it is. So the idea that something's traveling faster than the speed of light means that it's not actually traveling through space-time in the traditional sense. Yeah, wormholes, for example. But in the same way, Caroline's star was visible everywhere simultaneously. All right. Chapter 1. Derelict Region. Joas Constellation, the Uptest System, Planet 4. A darkened path, littered with charred bones and glowing embers, weaved through the smoking remnants of a dead forest. The mark of evil was everywhere in this forsaken place, and the whispers of demons taunted its sole visitor to turn away. Suppressing her fear, she pressed onward through the blackened, shattered tree trunks and emerged into a vast field. A single object broke the emptiness of this desolate expanse. A stone crypt with a heavy lid resting alongside, waiting to be sealed for eternity. The sky overhead boiled with thick black clouds that warned of the apocalyptic storm coming to destroy this world once and for all. But she had come too far to turn back now, and after taking a deep breath for strength, dared to venture one step closer. Immense grief seized her instantly, the kind of suffocating misery that only the loss of a loved one can inflict. A great hero was laid to rest inside the crypt, struck down on the brink of vanquishing the curse of this land. Approaching the tomb of this unknown champion, she realized that she was no longer alone, but beside her walked countless other souls whose number filled the fields as far as she could see. They were too stricken with grief, and they had braved the treacherous landscape to bid this great hero farewell. She reached the open crypt, but was unable to gaze upon the corpse that laid inside. Looking elsewhere, she found that people surrounding her were faceless. They stood silently, shoulder to shoulder, as if waiting for her to speak. But it was the demons that spoke up first. As their sinister murmurs reached across the wasteland to her ears, a flash of lightning lashed out from the wicked clouds overhead. The spirit suddenly vanished from the great fields without a trace. Only the crypt, and the greatest fear that she had ever known, remained. Without warning, the corpse lunged at her with outstretched arm and shouted, "Viola!" Pulling her firmly from the depths, the corpse screamed again and then fell deeper and deeper towards oblivion. "Viola, pull up!" With a gasp, she awoken to the blare of warning klaxons and flashing instrument lights. The cockpit canopy was filled with swirling reddish-brown clouds bands of Abyssus 4's upper atmosphere. Viola pulled back hard on the flight stick and jammed the throttle all the way forward. The massive gas giant dropped from the canopy's view and was replaced by the blinding light of the system's sun. The holotech engines behind her roared to life, and the spacecraft started to rattle violently. The earpiece in her helmet shouted again, "You dropped below the grav deck! Use more thrust!" Viola's left thumb depressed the switch to the throttle. The afterburners erupted, and the rattling subsided as the Atron-class frigate accelerated safely from the powerful grip of Abyssus 4. "These dreams are going to kill me someday," she thought. Switching the engines off, she took in several deep breaths of oxygen and tried to calm down. "What the hell's wrong with you? That's the third time this month." Still shaking, she unclipped the mask and reached for the vial of painkillers resting below the MPD multifunction projection display. Her face was moist with perspiration and tears. She popped the lid off and let 2 pills roll into her mouth. "Viola!" After swallowing the pills, she tried to force a harsh edge to her voice. "Bear, shut up already!" she yelled. "Could you mind your own business for once when I'm out here?" The drugs started to take their effect. The high was not as potent as she had hoped, but their effects were welcome just the same. The voice in the earpiece matched her harshness. "I just saved your life again, god damn it. I just saved your life again. God damn it, Viola. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't take that ship away from you right now." Through her watery eyes, the bluish black canvas of Abyssus space came into focus as she turned the craft away from the sun. "Because you've made a career of writing on the success of my work, and you're not going to do anything to jeopardize that." "You should remind DivCon of that more often," Bearer sneered. "They seem to forget about the successes of your work all the time." Viola ignored the veiled threat. "If those fools want my resignation, all they have to do is ask. But they're not going to do that now, not since the horror system was taken by the Emperor Hydron, as I predicted." "Listen to me," Bear continued, his voice more subdued. "I'm speaking to you as a friend now. You're burning yourself out. It's going to draw attention from the wrong people. They're going to start auditing the flight recorder logs, Viola, and I can't cover up these mishaps forever. Especially if anyone finds out about these pills. Bear, the ship is the only shelter I have from the Federation politicians," she answered. Leaning forward against the harness strap, she tapped the MFD. The cockpit's instruments bathed her flight suit in a greenish hue as data scrolled down the screen. "Do you have the latest casualty estimates for Iana?" There was a pause. "At last passed, 63 million dead, mostly from orbital bombardment directed at population centers. 1 million or so killed during the surface landing, another million in subsequent ground combat. At least 2 million were taken as slaves. though we don't know the exact numbers for some time. The faceless soul in her dream returned to the forefront of her memory. She closed her eyes and tried to push them away. And the elders? Viola, please. The elders, goddammit! She yelled, angered now. Have you heard any reports at all? Nothing, Bear answered tersely, and no word from your mysterious order either. Then make sure that Alliant technicians retask any local assets to monitoring the transports that leave the surface, she responded, reaching forward for the painkillers again. That's a waste of time, and you know it, he argued. We'll never learn the identities of anyone who is down there, let alone... 2 more pills rolled into her mouth. I don't want to hear your opinion, Bear. She felt the drugs work over her muscles, relaxing them. Just get it done. Do you have anything else for me? Actually, yes, Viola, he retorted. DivCom wants a report detailing your estimates on which systems Amarians will attack next. The crypt in the barren field was beckoning her to walk forward, and the demons started to whisper again. Have them tell the politicians Luminaire is next, she breathed. Viola switched off the comlink before Bear had time to protest. Essence Region, Crux Constellation, the Rain System, Planet 9, Moon 4, Federal Intelligence Office Headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel Bear Gestenau, that is not how to pronounce his name, slammed his fist into his desk. That miserable bitch, he thought, trying to raise her again on the comlink. There was no answer. His eyes scanned the display of live telemetry broadcasting from Viola's frigate. The toggle switch for the subspace comms had just been switched off from inside. Why do I bother? He asked himself. She just wants to kill herself. There's nothing I can do to stop her. With a sigh, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the holographic information dancing before him. Viola Antones had been with the Federal Intelligence Office for almost 20 years, and in that time became FIO's leading expert on Mimitar-Amarian conflict. Her expertise was driven by passionate, and sometimes unpopular, opinions about the moral responsibilities of governments. The Amarians, with their embrace of slavery and expansionistic ambitions, became the natural target of her intellectual wrath. The Gallente Federation was still embroiled in a bitter war with the Caldari state, but she continued to lobby tirelessly for direct military intervention on behalf of the beleaguered Mimitars. Political suicide, Bear thought. Whatever the moral purity of her beliefs, the Federation was too weary from war to listen. Viola ruined her career when she portrayed the FIO as being critical of government policymakers, accusing them of collectively failing to uphold the Federation's implicit obligations to safeguard human rights beyond the Gallente borders. It was not the opinion of the infuriated agency superiors and alienated her. It was not the opinion of the infuriated agency superiors and alienated her from her colleagues. After all, she was paid to have opinions. What? And alienated her from colleagues. After all, she was paid to have opinions. It was a matter in which she decided to make them publicly. It was the manner in which she decided to make them publicly known. Tasked by the FIO to produce routine intelligence briefings for the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, Viola secretly produced 2 separate reports. One report detailed what Division Command thought she would say. The other copy, worded much differently, is what would eventually make its way into the hands of Gallente senators. Bear still grimaced whenever he thought about the committee's reaction. In a report, Viola cited, quote, the utter lack of foreign policy backbone, end quote, as bearing partial responsibility for the Amar Empire's aggressive push into Mimitar space. She decried the political cronies whose gross incompetence was evident in their belief that rational dialogue was even possible with fanatical zealots, and the deadly failure of politically elected imbeciles to recognize the reclaiming for what it is, a state-sponsored genocide, by far the gravest threat ever to face humanity, let alone the Federation. The resulting political fallout put so much pressure on the agency that DivCom, Division Command, contemplated taking legal action against her, except for the fact that doing so would deprive them of a valued resource whose contributions to the Federation were uncontested. The FIO ultimately decided that incurring the wrath of politicians was worth the price of keeping Viola around, but only under the condition that her visibility, both publicly and internally, be reduced to nothing. Despite more than 20 years of professional experience, she was stripped of her rank and made the hierarchical equivalent to a first-year associate. Viola's life was the agency. She had devoted little time to developing a social life and had no friends or family to lean on. She was crushed, Bear thought, and she's never been the same since. Bear lit a cigarette and slowly exhaled a plume of smoke through the visual telemetry floating over his desk. The agency wanted her out of sight, but they still wanted her talents. What better way to reconcile those needs than by giving her a ship? The electronics on Viola's Atron-class frigate were modified to broadcast her location to the agency at all times, and her security clearance was adjusted so that she could only access restricted information if she was physically on board. On station or planets, her clearance was blocked. Division Command was taking every precaution to avoid a repeat of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee fiasco, while still getting productive work from her, and could care less if they crushed her ego in the process. It was cruel, Bear thought, but it was working, until she started looking for ghosts. Despite the magnitude of the fall of the planet Iana, Viola was investigating nonsense about secretive orders and hidden figures of power within Mimitar tribes whose importance to Galente interests she deemed as paramount. Yet she could produce no evidence of their existence, and still insisted on devoting precious intelligence-gathering resources to investigate her wild suspicions. I'm losing her, and it's just a matter of time before this all ends badly, Bear thought. The intelligence business was costly enough to the Psyche, but it was especially hard on those assigned to the Amarians. Viola would not be the first analysis to lose her mind because of them. He stamped out his cigarette and pushed himself away from his desk, giving the telemetry one last look. Up to system, 4th planet. Geosynchronous orbit. All systems green. And all ambient signal strength at 0. She's completely alone out there, Bear thought. A fitting picture for the life she chose. Straightening his uniform, Bear left his office to attend a meeting with other task officers. As soon as the door closed behind him, the telemetry graphic depicting ambient signal strength flashed bright red and held for a few seconds before returning to normal. Metropolis region. Tiat constellation. Horror system. Planet 6, Iana. Armageddon-class battleship, Impervious. As seen from the vantage of ships patrolling high above, the swirling cirrus clouds of planet Iana still bore the long, dark streaks that span the width of its continents. Speak to me, God. The screen cycled through different views as the Imperial warship surrounded the former Mimitar world. Approximately 24 hours had passed since the last guns stopped, but uncontrollable firestorms still raged all over the planet. The occasional break in the clouds revealed green landmasses pockmarked with wide swaths of blackened scars. Tell me that millions of people I killed yesterday deserve to die. Commodore Foss Akrydon tapped the console, and the images disappeared. He swiveled his chair so that he faced the window of his quarters. The horror system sun gleamed off the section of the Impervious's hull, illuminating the darkened room with an eerie gold-tinted aura. He put his hand to the forehead and closed his eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to reveal sympathy for the enemy of God. I will not hesitate when the test of faith finds me. Voss broke down into sobs as he tried to recite the prayer which, hours earlier, compelled him to follow the Grand Admiral's orders to bombard the planet of Iana from space. The Impervious was just one of 100 Imperial Navy battleships in the Armada sent to take control of the planet, and Voss was likely to receive special military honors for his role in the attack. The fleet under his direct command was one of the few that encountered serious Mimitar resistance. By the time the Impervious was training her deadly tachyon beams at the city below, Foss Akrydon had coordinated the systematic destruction of dozens of enemy warships. Not one Imperial ship was lost in the engagement. The decisiveness of the victory carried divine implications that inspired his crew, further strengthening their belief that he was a true paladin, an executor of God's will. My God, I beg you, speak to me, please. Voss wiped away the tears and ran his hand along his bare scalp. Dozens of military awards and religious artifacts lined the walls of his quarters. Most of the distinctions were presented by Emperor Hadrian himself during the elaborate ceremonies attended by the most powerful figures in the Amar Empire. Commodore Akridon was already a legend in the Imperial Navy, renowned for crushing pockets of Mimitar resistance throughout the Empire and requesting the most dangerous combat assignments for his fleet. The Emperor treated Faust like a son. He placed more faith in his abilities as Navy commander than he did in his own admirals. It was publicly known that there were shared bloodlines between House Acreon and the royal Cador family. But in truth, there was little contact between them. Emperor Hadrian loved Faust, not for his ancestry, but for his relentless dedication to the Reclaiming and deeply devout faith. They both envisioned a day where New Eden would become a glorious paradise it was meant to be, where the faithful of every world within the cosmos lifted their universal praise to God. But now his faith was rattled to the core. Grand Admiral Mechioth Sorum, the supreme commander of all Amarian military forces, never asked Faust to participate in surface bombardment before Iana. Perhaps it was simply a tactical necessity, a military requirement to maximize the firepower directed against such a vital target. Or it was the Emperor administrating a final test of faith, one that would ultimately determine his ascension to the rank of Admiral. Faust was a man whose successes in combat was driven by his belief in the divine righteousness of his actions. Yet today he found himself unable to rid the images of Iana from his mind. The burden is more than I can bear, my God. Was it not your divine will that these pagans be burned for their sins? Why do I not rejoice at the slaughter of your enemy now? A soft tone broke the silence. Faust looked towards his deck. You have listened, and now you speak to me. The tone resonated a second time. What is it, Lieutenant? The voice sounded apologetic. My lord, I am sorry to disturb you. We have a situation. Go on. Comms detected a powerful burst of gamma and X-ray energy that was not generated by any known celestial objects. When they checked the recorders, they found that the subspace ambient signal strength spiked at the same exact time, and there was a structure embedded in the transmission. It was a distress signal, but hugely amplified. From whom? Some of our own high priests, my lord. The message is distorted, but we can confirm the voice print of Apostle Taj Rukan. There are other voices in the recording, but we cannot identify them. They sound like they were ambushed. Another test of my faith? Faust's hands rolled into tight fists. Rebels? Correct, my lord. The message is explicit. Where did the burst originate from? My lord, this will sound unnatural, but the originating source is Demnon. Anger formed the brow lines of Faust's expression. The mining complex in Hyel? Yes, my lord. The comm officer checked several times. I am your humble servant, my god, and I will show no mercy to the animals responsible for this atrocity. Lieutenant, hail the other captains and instruct navigation to set course for Demin. Best possible speed. I'm on my way to the bridge. Yes, my lord. The battered planet Iana moved from sight as the Impervious started its turn. Faust stood upright and caught his reflection in the window. I am your humble servant. With a deep breath, he collected himself and moved towards the door. There were no dreams this time. Only blackness. Pause. There were no dreams this time. Only blackness prevailed. Chirp. Viola slowly opened her eyes, wondering for a moment how long she was asleep for, and then realizing that she had barely slept at all. She felt so numb that she was having trouble focusing on her surroundings. The high was still there, sort of, but it was just as painful as it was relieving. Like trying to quench thirst by drinking seawater, she mused. She blinked several times. Her mind was working slowly, drudging through foggy memory, trying to remember how to interpret the myriad of readings and instruments on the MFD. The warning had saved her from plummeting into the atmosphere of Abyssus 4 had a different tone, she realized. This was a signal. Chirp. She leaned forward and tapped the screen. Gamma and X-ray, she said out loud. The fog suddenly evaporated, and she realized the significance of the signal type. The order! She started tapping quickly on the screen, coaxing the Atron's sophisticated electronics to find the source of the signal. Frowning from the computer's first answer, she ran the analysis again. This time it displayed a much different response. Viola's eyes opened wide, and she moved towards her hand. She slowly moved her hands away from the controls. The screen read, "Viola Antonis, we have been watching you. Come to Demnon before Gruul Shatan strikes." I'm not dreaming this, Viola thought as a chill ran through the length of her spine. The literal translation of Demnon in the Amarian language was Demon's Stone, and the location was deep inside the territory controlled by the Imperial Navy. Known as an infamous labor camp for Mimitar slaves, Demnon was a titanic asteroid that could be considered a failed planet. At just over 1,300 kilometers in diameter, it was still geologically active and featured constant volcanic events on its surface. The most prominent danger to Demnon was a highly elliptical orbit. One revolution take 238 standard Eve days, but its path intersected a dense asteroid belt. The remains of the planet Demnon used to be a dense asteroid belt. The remains of the planet Demnon used to be that rained epic destruction on the surface every 119 days. The Amarians called this cataclysmic meteor storm Gruul Shatan, and transformed the space around Demnon into a lethal kill zone for spacecraft. But deep beneath the surface of the hellish world were vast deposits of hemorphorite, too deep for the cutting power of strip-mounted mining lasers to reach. The Amarian drilled and blasted some 30 kilometers into the crust to access the precious ore. To sustaining mining operations, a sprawling complex was constructed deep inside of the massive cavity. Billions of cubic meters of minerals were excavated and hauled away, sometimes only to be replaced by magma vents welling upwards from the mantle or deposited from above by the wrath of Gruul Shatan. Only Amarian arrogance and slave manpower could make such an impractical venture possible, Viola thought. Without question, there was such a thing as hell in New Eden. If there was such a thing as hell in New Eden, then its doorstep was Demnon. And it was the Amarians, and it was the Mimitar slaves that converted this underworld into a precious resource for the Emperor, who considered himself an ambassador to God. The thought enraged Viola, but the chills returned as she realized that the 119th day of Demnon's orbit was only a few hours away. The Order has eluded me at every turn, Viola thought, reaching for more painkillers. A clue here, something unexplained there. Now this, an offer to meet them in the most dangerous region of space during its most dangerous time at the local year. She chewed the pills instead of swallowing them, but hardly noticed the bitter taste. Before Gruul Shatan strikes, Viola recalled from the message as the drugs ran their wicked course through her veins. Why not? The Atron shuddered as the warp drive engines powered on. I'm already dead. Or I'm dead already. Viola was right. Again. Bear's mind was racing as he rushed back towards his office. He hated to admit it, but the task officer's meeting had touched on everything that she had asked him to look for. All diplomatic channels between the Federation and the Mimitar tribes had been severed because of the invasion, but information continued to flow from the intelligence assets observing Amarian and Mimitar movements, and the implications of the latest data were extremely unsettling to DivCom. The meeting focused on an industrial believed to be carrying the first Mimitar prisoners taken from Iana. Shortly after the ship's arrival to the Demnon mining complex, a riot erupted, which claimed the lives of several Paladin guards, a completely unheard of occurrence given the brutal effectiveness of slave control methods used by the Amarians. Most interestingly of all, Demnon was about to make orbital pass directly through the Hyal system's largest asteroid belt. No ships would be able to approach the complex until the resulting meteor storm passed. That's just too much of a coincidence, Bear thought, wincing from the stench of cigarettes and sweat as the front door to his office opened. The Elent task force officers at the meeting stated that the chatter on known Mimitar military frequencies spiked right after the riot took place, and that the amount of chatter was already elevated because of the Iana invasion. Viola had asked about the Elders several times, and this series of events implied that someone extremely important to the Mimitar, Elders or otherwise, was taken to Demnon. The desk console buzzed the moment he reached his seat. This is Bear. Lieutenant Colonel, We've just isolated a voice intercept from the Matari tribe military channel that you need to listen to, the voice said. It was one of the junior analysts from the Elange desk. It's about an hour old. Parts of it are missing, but the conversation triggered some keyword alarms. Stand by. Bear made sure his own electronics were recording before the playback started. Brought to Demnon. Care about the risk anymore. We don't have time for rapid response team. We have Valkyrs back from the current challenge squad. Guys, quickly. Death sentence. What choice do we really have? The recording stopped abruptly with a burst of static. That's all of it, the analyst said. We're working on the voice print now. Can call you if you get a match. All right, thanks. All right, thanks. The line clicked off. Holy shit, Bear thought as he fumbled for a cigarette. They're really going to try to get someone out of there. The Valkyrs were a legendary special operations force composed of the bravest warriors from the Minmatar tribes, and their involvement all but guaranteed the rescue mission was either in late planning stages or already in progress. And that mission would certainly fail, no matter how good those Valkyr commandos think they are. Bear thought as he brought up the telemetry data from Viola's frigate. Replacements for the Amarian guards killed during the riot are probably already on their way to Demnon, and Bear stopped mid-thought when he saw the destination locked onto the Atron's navigation systems. The unlit cigarette fell from his mouth. Fuck, Bear muttered as he tapped furiously on the console to remotely disable the Atron's engines, but it was too late. The holographic display flickered as Viola's frigate entered into the Stargate that would take her into the Hyel system. The Federation intelligence officer stared in disbelief. How the hell could she know about this already? He wondered. There are more subtle ways for her to chase the death wish. Yay, chapter 1 is over. All right, now I get to look at everybody yelling at me because I mispronounced everything, I'm assuming. Hold on. Elint. Elint. Okay, fine. Fair enough. Well, by the way, so vacuum is still a medium when it comes to light, because space itself is like I said, things can only travel at the speed of light through space-time. So even if there's no mass, it's still a medium at that point, right? Electronic intel. That makes sense. E-int. L-int. Right. Excellent bad connection reading. Yes! I'm glad you guys liked it. All right. I'm going to put on an ad and go to the bathroom, and then we'll start on chapter 2. Yeah, jump freighters do it all the time. You can't jump into Jita, but like all of the faction warfare, like the Fleet and Hades and all that stuff, we just undock from Jita and jump directly to the... This is a longer story, so for those of you just that came in the middle of this, let me kind of catch you guys up. What we're reading here is called Theodicy. Okay, Theodicy is a novella that was written by Tony Gonzalez, who is the writer of both the Empyrean Age and Templar 1. This story takes place before both of those books, and therefore should be considered a sort of the first of a trilogy, in a way. Correct. Yeah, you can't jump into HiSec because you can't light a Sino in HiSec. So what they do is they jump to the nearest low sec and then jump, like use a Stargate to get back and then go into Jita, load up, and then jump freighter out. That would be Riley, that would be A, problematic, but also B, I mean, like, the compensation of that would make Dodixie far more important, right? Like, people would take stalking Dodixie serious if you couldn't go to Jita, like for realsies. Zakara saw the danger to his brother and did not hesitate. Without weapon or armor, he hurled himself at the beast, attacking with his bare hands. Enraged, the beast turned and struck Zakara, opening a terrible wound in his side. Seizing the moment, Gorum ran the sword through the beast's heart, thus ending the battle victorious. But Zakara, mortally wounded, cried out in pain. "You sacrificed yourself for me," Garun said, taking his hand. "We are brothers," Zakara answered, just before breathing his last, "and in God we shall remain brothers for all time." The Book of the Prophet Junip, 10:25 through 30, the Scriptures. I will tell you how this madness is born. A man peers over the edge of chaos into the event horizon, where light can never escape. And he turns and sees the remains of his shattered life, of what was taken from him without pause or remorse. The soul decides, because a man is already dead, and it craves chaos for this purpose, to kill the God who did this to them. The Thucker Testament, excerpt from Volume 3. Just in case. Boom. Derelict region. Vidalia constellation. The Ursha system. Valkyr Talon Squadron rally point. Typhoon class battleship. Hellwrath. My son. Decades of unrelenting guerrilla warfare carved several lines into the face of the Valkyr admiral known as Karth Mutana. The long, narrow mane of hair that grew from the center of his scalp was streaked with bands of gray, and his muscular frame still possessed the size and strength of a cursorial tribesman half his age. Today, his eyes were darker than usual, and his expression betrayed both anger and sadness instead of its prevailing fortitude. They killed my only son. The crewmen seated in the trenches alongside the bridge took note of his grim demeanor and felt the heavy burden on their shoulders grow unbearable. The reality that Iana was lost to the Amarians was just too difficult to absorb, and many were receiving news of loved ones lost, or worse, not hearing anything at all. The Admiral was always a pillar of strength for them, but seeing him like this was bitterly demoralizing and added to the depth of their own sorrows. My hatred for them is all that remains now. All of the Hellwraith's officers stood behind their admiral, listening to the Valkyr mission planners explain the roles of each squadron in the rescue operation. A large screen built into the bulkhead above the forward bridge windows was divided into 4 sections, one for each commander in the briefing. Karth heard his name mentioned several times as the planners talked, but his mind never wandered from the memories of his son. Before he was a soldier, he would watch as I spilled the blood of Amarian sons, the blood of Amarian fathers, and he would say to me, "You are what I want to become." Admiral? The planner mentioned something of the mission to him directly, but was ignored once more. "I am Karth Mutana, freedom fighter of the Crucial tribe, Valkyr warrior of the Minmatar people, wretched father of a dead son." All eyes focused on the grizzled veteran seated in the captain's chair of the mighty Hellwraith. The scowl on Karth's brow deepened, but remained transfixed on the space directly in front of him. No one dared to press for his attention. The mission planner cleared his throat, and then continued. "This will be my final battle. Talon Squadron will warp into the CZ first to engage all Imperial forces in the area. Surface-based defenses must be neutralized before any spaceborne threats. You'll only have a few seconds to declare a go, no-go for Omicron, and anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes egress from the CZ before the meteor storm pulverizes everything in the area. My last vendetta. The jump-in point will pull you directly on top of Daemon, matching her orbital velocity and trajectory around the High-Level System sun. Omicron must be protected at all costs. If Omicron fails to enter the primary vent cavern within 2 minutes of your arrival, the odds of mission succeeding? History will remember me as a godslayer." "Omicron will reach the cavern," Karth interrupted, snapping out of his haze. "The Hellwrath and her talons will see to it. My crew and I are prepared to give our lives so that Omicron may succeed. The question is, what odds are you giving Mimitar to succeed? The mission planner shifted his weight. I'm sorry, Admiral, but the Valkyrs could not help Iana, Colonel. All the strength assembled here was powerless to stop the Paladins from laying waste to one of our civilization's most sacred planets. We did not have a plan to defend that world that most of us here called home. Karth's officers remained at attention, making every effort to hide their shock at the Admiral's words. The mission planner was flustered and tried to answer the question candidly. We did, sir, but the sheer size and strength of the invasion force overwhelmed. Colonel, the Admiral interrupted again as the lines in his face deepened. They killed millions of us, tens of millions. Please tell me that the plan to defend those people was the best that the Valkyrs could offer. Tell me how that plan accounted for the odds of facing a larger than expected attack force. His voice lowered to a whisper. Or the odds my son faced as tachyon beams fell from the sky above him. The mission planner was speechless. Every precious second that passed brought the deadly meteor storm closer to Demnon. The window for rescuing the elders, if they were even still alive, was closing fast. Admiral, you have my deepest sympathies for the loss of your noble son, but the Amarians have secured below the surface by now. They won't detect Omicron's entry if we attack, just as the first meteor's impact. Karth flew out of the captain's chair in rage. Thick veins bulged from his neck and temples as he roared, "We failed to save Iana because of a miscalculation of odds, Colonel. The elders are all that remains of the world, perhaps our entire culture, and you dare to speak of odds like some sort of game? Navigation!" One of the officers beside Karth snapped his boots to attention. "Yes, sir." "Set a course for the High Elf system, and make sure the final jump point is set against the coordinates that the Colonel has provided." The officer's expression beamed sheer determination. "Nav course to Demnon." "Yes, sir." He leapt to the trench and started barking orders to the crewmen seated inside. Karth glared at the cameras above the screen. "Omicron, you have a go. Lock in your course and meet us at Demnon." The Omicron flight leader stared quizzically at the screen. "Now!" Karth screamed. "Move it!" The mission planner tried to speak, but was cut off again by the furious Valkyr Admiral. "You mention the word odds one more time, and I swear I will crush your skull if I live to see you again. There is nothing left to chance. Do you know what we're fighting for now, Colonel? The right to bury our own children. Because of odds, saving them is no longer an option." The Hellwraith started as its turn as dozens of Mimitar warships positioned themselves alongside. Omicron Wing, comprised of 2 Rifter-class frigates loaded with 1 squad of Valkyr commandos each, moved away from the main fleet. The group was just 7 jumps from Hyel, and although the crew did not know yet the destination, they sensed that fierce combat was imminent. Another bridge officer approached Karth and spoke quietly. "Sir, I have the information you requested." Karth turned towards the officer. "Tell me." The man hesitated before answering. "The Galanteans provided us with real-time information as the Imperial fleet moved into position above Iana. Comparing it to the reconnaissance data of damage placement on the surface gives us a high level of confidence that—" "I trust your information, Lieutenant," Karth interrupted. The 4 grating underneath both men's feet shook as the Hellwraith warp drive engine powered on. "Just give me a name." "Yes, sir." The man was beginning to sweat. "The Imperial flagship positioned over the city where your son was lost was the Impervious, sir. It was Commodore Foss Archridon." Derelict region. Bedelia Constellation. Their Ursha system, Valkyr Talon Squadron Rally Point. Rifter-class frigate, Omicron 1. The Valkyr squad captain focused on the sound of the Rifter engine, allowing a steady hum to drown out the replay of the Operation Tempest mission plan. Years of combat experience taught him to seize the precious moments of rest wherever he could. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed his mind to wander back to the hopeless days of his youth, and to a moment that he revisited often. "I see that you used a Kreetok to murder them. Why use this weapon?" "Because it's quiet." "Slitting the throat of 4 Nephintars is hardly quiet, boy." "I set them down gently, so that no one would hear. Not gently enough. I tracked your movement. I saw everything. And where their masters discovered what happened to them, the paladins will come looking for you. Let them come. They won't take me alive. Do you enjoy killing, Vlad? How the fuck do you know what my name is? I said, do you enjoy killing, Vlad? I'm indifferent to it. Who are you? Were you being indifferent when you murdered those men? I'm indifferent to killing traitors that betray us to the Amarians. I'd believe that if you didn't rob them as well. Pull the trigger or stop wasting my time. You're not intimidated by this gun I'm pressing into your forehead? The only thing that intimidates me is being alive long enough to become a slave. Now pull the fucking trigger or get out of my face. You're going to do well, as a soldier, Vlad. What are you doing? We're going to make you a better killer, Vlad, for Mimitar's sake. Sweet dreams. The excited voice of the Rifter pilot blared through the speakers, breaking apart a distant memory that was as painful as it was treasured to the elite soldier. Valkyrs, we are a go. Repeat, a go. ETA to CZ, 9 minutes, 7 seconds. 6, 5, mark. Flight engineer, secure all gear and fix for battle stations. This ingress is gonna be hot. The cabin lights switched to red, and Captain Vlad Kintreb snapped fully out of his daydream. The flight engineer entered and began working his way along the two benches of soldiers facing each other, helping to snap their 4-point harnesses into place. He worked silently, mindful of the relative peace that these men were enjoying. He knew that it would not last for much longer. 20 years, Vlad thought, running through the checklist of equipment strapped all over him. 20 years since I was taken out of those filthy alleyways by the crazy Valkyr recruiter. I wonder what he'd have to say about this suicide mission. The engineer approached and pulled the straps firmly over the combat pack fastened to his shoulders. Captain Kintreb, along with every other Valkyr commando, was bristling with weaponry, each one armed with an assault rifle, pistol, extra ammunition, grenades, and a combat knife known as a kritak. Some carried additional equipment and weapons for specialized roles, but for this mission, which favored stealth over brute force, traveling light was mandatory. The flight engineer checked to make sure that the rifle was fastened securely across Vlad's chest, and then patted down the rest of the gear strapped to his legs and sides. Satisfied that everything would remain in place, the engineer moved on to the next commando. The soldiers were quiet, each one handling the pressure a little bit differently. Some sat serenely with their eyes closed in meditation. Others were concentrated on the holographic mission briefing hovering before them. How many of us will be here for the trip home? Vlad wondered, if there even is a trip home. The three-dimensional map of Denman mining complex was projected on the floor grating at the center of the cabin. The vent cavern entrance that Omicron wing would descend into was labeled Hell's Gate. Study the map, Vlad instructed. Know every detail of it. There are copies in your mission pack, but you should commit these schematics to memory. One of the soldiers spoke up. Any last-minute changes to the plan? Negative, Thrumgar, Vlad answered. As of now, Tempest has no changes. What about the elders that are missing? Another soldier asked. Any word on their status? Negative, Kurgan, Vlad answered. But assumption right now is that they're still alive. Some of these soldiers exchanged looks, and Vlad made a mental note of the ones who did. He decided to address their unspoken concerns before they could cause more doubt. I know what you're thinking, but if there's even a chance that they still breathe, it's worth giving up our very lives to find out, Vlad said. Without those elders, I don't think I have to explain what the consequences are. All of the soldiers agreed, except for Thrumgar. This one's going to be trouble, Vlad sensed. I must take care of him in front of the others. We are the Mimitar's blade, Vlad started, and the spirits of Iana are with us. This mission will be difficult, but Tempest is not a desperation effort. We will succeed. Thrumgar was still defiant. Success even without the elders? The uncertainty in this one will kill him faster than any Amarian bullet. Tempest's primary mission is to determine if the elders taken from Iana are still alive, Thrumgar. If they are, then our secondary mission is to bring them home. Vlad paused for a moment and then added, Are you up for the task? I am Valkyr, Thrumgar growled. reacting as if insulted. Of course I'm up to the task. The soldiers fell silent, felt a slight lurch to their side as the Rifter accelerated to warp speed. So am I, Vlad answered, this time with more resolve in his voice. And so are all the warriors on this ship. Derelict region. Agu constellation. The Hyel system. Demnon planetesimal. The planet of the Hyel system shot past the bubble canopy of the Atron, accelerated into the final leg of the journey to Demnon. Adrenaline overwhelmed the drugs coursing through Viola's veins as she contemplated the extraordinary risk of the situation. It's all worth it, she thought, slowly crushing another pill in her mouth, especially if the fall of Iana explains why the Order is making direct contact with us. She double-checked that the recorders were functioning properly, running tests on frequencies across electromagnetic and subspace spectrums. Viola did not know what to expect, and for reasons that included everything except proving the Order's existence to the FIO or anyone else, she wanted to be certain. She wanted to be certain that the full details of the encounter were preserved. Viola skipped a breath as the warp engines started to power down. A tiny reddish dot appeared at the center of the warp core, glowing steadily until the hideous face of Demnon's completely filled the bubble canopy. The Demon's Stone, she thought, staring at the lava flows slicing fiery pathways across the elongated, shattered world. Immediately, the frigate's sensors warned of the incoming meteor storm, and Viola noticed that the space beyond Demnon was sparkling with sporadic pinpoints of brilliant light. Grul Shaitan, she thought, sunlight reflecting off of tumbling faces of countless boulders traveling at hundreds of meters per second. One of the comlink's lights was blinking wildly, indicating Bear's desperate efforts to reach her. She contemplated answering, but then decided against it. Why bother with him at all? She asked herself. The recorders alone will answer all his questions. Viola suddenly felt herself float off the seat into the shoulder straps, and every electrical system on the Atron shut down without warning. The panels, screens, and indicator lights inside of the cockpit went dark, and the temperature inside of the frigate started to drop. Fearful for her life, Viola scrambled to strap the oxygen mask over her mouth, then looked downwards to check that all of the seals of her survival suit were properly fastened. A flash of light illuminated the ship, and her eyes instinctively darted towards the view outside. A Bestower-class transport was adrift just a few dozen meters in front of the Atron, so close that Viola could read the Amarian religious inscription etched into the ship's hull. The vessel appeared abandoned. No navigation lights were active. No portholes were illuminated from the inside, and the entire ship was rotating slowly along its axis. 2 dead ships out here? Viola thought, desperately trying to coax her own frigate back to life. What the hell am I supposed to do now? She suddenly felt a strange sensation erupt from deep within her skull, which spread quickly to the base of her ears. Releasing the controls, her hands reflexively snapped to grab at her helmet. 2 deaths with sublime purpose, Viola Antiones. Whatever. Viola's body twitched in terrified reaction to the wicked voice that assaulted her eardrums. Without electrical power, it was impossible for anything inside of the ship to generate that kind of audio, and yet the voice sounded like it was spoken from inside of her. Her eyes locked onto the weightless vial of pills floating against the canopy shielding. Addictions, the voice hissed. You and the hopeless addictions of your species. Viola tried to calm herself, accepting that the Order was fully in control. She could sense biting anger in the voice, and decided that it would be unwise to interrupt. Addictions to power, to greed, to lust, to gods. All drugs that falsely satisfy a need. Do you understand what that need is? The temperature inside of the Atron continued to plummet, and there was nothing that she could do to stop it. Viola abandoned her attempts to restart her ship system and stared at the Bestower drifting outside. The need to be free of fear and uncertainty, child. The Minmatar elders controlled their fear of the unknown by nurturing patience in their quest for understanding. That quest united an entire people. Their tribe was acting as one. Their tribes were acting as one, even without the awareness of a single nation to define them. No other race was on a surer path towards achieving what we have than they. But the Amarians. An inscription on the Bestower's hull caught Viola's eye. The will of God, Amar invincible. The Amarians and their fear. The Amarians and their addiction. The Amarians and their ignorance. Iana was all that remained of the example that humanity desperately needed to evolve, to rid itself of fear once and for all, and to embrace the enlightenment that has preserved us for a millennia. It sounded like grains of sand striking metal at first, and then the occasional pebble smashing into a bubble canopy. The storm is close, Viola thought, craving painkiller evermore. She could see that the glitter beyond Demnon was starting to take on the distinct shape of asteroids. Too many times have the addiction of man destroyed the progress of ages. History is about to fail us again, and deny us the right to walk amongst you once more. The vial of painkillers crashed against the console and spilled its contents everywhere as the Atron suddenly powered back on. Tiny ripples of light pulsed throughout the bubble canopy as the frigate's shield absorbed the impacts of debris from Gruul Shaitan. Not since before New Eden's gates collapsed have we seen darker days than these. Will you find the strength to restore what was lost with Iana? With a shrill alarm, the sensors on board the Atron registered the arrival of 7 Imperial Navy warships. Viola watched in horror as each of them began to actively target her ship. Or will this be the legacy of humankind forever? Viola shrieked as the bestower exploded in a blinding flash that showered the Atron with shreds of scorched wreckage. Alarms warning of the danger screamed with relentless urgency, while she fumbled to locate the controls that would activate the frigate's warp drive. The ghastly visage of 8 corpses floating amongst the bestower's remain caused her to hesitate for a few seconds too long. Derelict region, Agu constellation, the High-Hail system, Demnon planetesimal, Armageddon-class battleship, impervious. Foss Akrion could not believe his eyes. The corpses of 8 Amarian high priests were all that remained of the bestower that he took upon himself to protect. One of them belonged to the beloved apostle Taj Rukan, the man who had pleaded for help in the distress call. And the Gallente Federation is responsible for this treachery, he thought. My God, I have another enemy to slay in your name. The weapon officer spoke in a voice tinged with anger. Range to target. 58 kilometers, radio crystals loaded. Designate November 1. Your orders, my lord. Before Faust can answer, the tactical officer interrupted. New contacts at 350. Z plus 17,000 meters. Range 71 kilometers. Mimitar rebels, my lord. Faust looked at the tactical display and counted 30 enemy warships. Regardless of the odds, he made a decision to avenge the murdered holy men before pulling his fleet out. There was time for just one shot. Weapons command. Assign turrets 1 and 2. Track November 1 and open fire. Derelict region, Aga constellation. The High-Hail system, Demnon planetesimal. Typhoon-class battleship, Hellwraith. The crew members on the bridge all saw it at the same time. 2 red beams slicing across space, impacting the aft section of the Atron and sending it into a violent spin. Without any sign of provocation that they could see, the Amarians had just shot down an unarmed Gallente Federation ship. But Karth was not interested in the tiny frigate spiraling out of control on the surface towards the surface of Demnon. He was fixed on the long golden contours of the Armageddon-class battleship in the tactical display. The mighty impervious, he thought to himself. Perhaps fate is not as unjust as I once thought. Essence region, Crutz constellation, the Wren system, planet 9, moon 4, Federal Intelligence Office headquarters. Bear watched in horror as the telemetry readings foretold of Viola's and Tone's imminent death. The Amarians, he thought incredulously, reaching his trembling hands towards the intercom switch. The goddamn Amarians attacked her. What's the problem? The sharp voice asked. Bear spoke quickly as he motioned the telemetry. An Amarian battle fleet just attacked Viola's ship over Demnon, Colonel. What was she doing there? Most likely investigating the same rescue mission theory that we discussed earlier. Her ship is on fire, Bear noticed, and spinning so fast that she's got to be unconscious by now. Most likely, Lieutenant Colonel? She switched off comms before I could ask her. Oh, most likely, Lieutenant Colonel? She switched off comms before I could ask her, she answered, staring at horror in the data. A Mimitar strike force witnessed the attack on Viola's ship. They're engaging the Imperial battle fleet as we speak. Right now? At Demnon? Correct. But we are about to lose telemetry. Viola's ship is just moments away from... Bear never finished the sentence, as the proximity sensors on the Atron registered 2 Jovian Wrath-class frigates, uncloak within meters of the doomed frigate. Chapter 3. We all having fun here? Hey, you know, I will definitely accept a comparison to Sean Connery, even if it is sarcastic and or unfavorable. That's fine. Yeah, now I want a Wrath class frigate too. Yes. What is it? What's the difference between your mother and a sick mallard? All right. Or an ill duck. I don't remember. I can't remember the joke now. God damn it. I'm at work, but I'm glad that I'm listening. Excellent. Hey, man, I'm glad I can bring it to life for you guys, right? It's funny because, like, because of my dyslexia, I actually find it easier to read things out loud because it gets me to slow down long enough to trip over my words less. And if you notice, I still do it, obviously. Everybody does. But, like, it gets me to go back and correct it. Whereas if I'm just reading it in my head, I can't often retain, like, the end of the sentence or the beginning of the sentence by the end of it, if that makes sense. So, like, I'm just reading words disconnected. Either way, doesn't matter. Chapter 3. War is not the dreadful end to all things as mankind fears. Conflict brings balance to nature as it adapts, mutates, and transforms itself into something stronger than before. Mankind is the master of nature because we can choose those mutations on our own accord. We can accelerate the inevitable dominance of a species. Through war, we can make ourselves stronger at the time and place of our choosing. War is not hell. Far from it. War is beautiful. War is divine. Grand Admiral Mechioth Sorum. Excerpt from a commencement speech to Paladin graduates of the Imperial Academy, 23-215 AD. It took the indifferent cruelty of glaive collars to make us forget which tribe we came from, and the horrors of war to unite us as Mimitar's. Isanur Earlbrald, Verrocchio Council Historical Archives, 23-217 AD. Derelict Region. Aga Constellation. The High Hill System. Demnon Planetesimal. A single point of light broke through the shroud of darkness that fell over Viola's bloodshot eyes, dilating slowly into the elongated tunnel. Every muscle in her body was contracted tightly, battling against the dangerously high G-forces introduced by the Atron's spin. A dizzying blur of orange and black filled the growing lens at the end of the tunnel as the frigate careened towards the surface of Demnon. The blare of alarms and the smell of smoke forewarned the fiery death that awaited her. Viola fought through the immense pressure, driving her into the seat, and managed to squeeze the flight stick in her right hand, moving it side to side. There was no response from the frigate's system, no way to eject from the doomed spacecraft, and no means to call for help. Letting go of the controls, she wondered if her death would even be noticed by anyone, and found that in these final moments that her intrigue for the Order has been replaced fully by seething hatred for them. But then the orange-black blur changed to bluish-white, and the tunnel vision effects started to fade quickly as the Atron's rate of spin slowed. The alternating view of Demnon and space leveled off into the distant horizon, and Viola tightly contracted muscles started to relax. The spacecraft's alarms continued to blare ominous warnings of damage and inoperable systems, and yet the frigate was somehow flying straight and level in a controlled descent towards the planetesimal's surface. In a final conscious effort that drained the last remnants of her physical strength, Viola turned her head slightly and saw a Jovian wraith flying just meters away from the bubble canopy. How did they do that? The pilot of Omicron 1 muttered, toggling a switch on the throttle control. Her heart was beating faster than it would if she was running. Talon Command, this is Omicron Lead. Be advised, the Jovians have stabilized the Atron and are towing it in. A static-laced voice answered the headpiece. Again, Omicron, did you say we're towing it? An asteroid the size of a cargo container tumbled past the canopy. Shit! Affirmative! Just overshot them. The whole rear quadrant of the frigate is gone, and it's still keeping up with the Wraiths. Omicron 2, can you confirm? Talon Command, this is 2. Confirmed. Atron crippled. The Jovians are using kind of tractor beam tech towards the surface. Goddamn asteroids. This is... Storm. The pilot of Omicron 1 grimaced, understanding exactly what the pilot of Omicron 2 was trying to report despite the interference. The leading edge of Gruul's Shatan was upon them, and the peripheral vision spotted the expanding shock waves of the meteor impacts to Demnon's surface dozens of kilometers below. Another asteroid tumbled by, triggering a proximity alarm on the Rifter. The canopy was shimmering in a red aura as thousands of smaller stones projectiles started to peppering the frigate's shields. Hell's Gate was still over 100 kilometers away, and their approach put the incoming storm at an angle that was almost directly in front of them. The idea, the mission planners thought, was to align Omicron headfirst with the obstacles to reduce the possibility of being blindsided. That was a flattering assumption, the pilot thought, as she nudged the throttle up to gain more speed, thinking that actually seeing these fucking things made them any less avoidable. The radio broke the pilot's concentration again. Ward, Checker 6, those Jovians... The Omicron pilot dared to glance off-center from the canopy towards the rear-view camera display. In her determined effort to avoid colliding with the incoming asteroids, she had lost track of the space behind her ship, and in combat, that was almost always a deadly mistake. Admiral, the Jovians are directly behind Omicron 1, the tactical officer said, incredulously, and the Atron is flying in tight formation with them. Karth paced the bridge impatiently. Why the hell are they here? The Wraiths in the crippled Atron were within range of the fleet's guns, but that was changing by the second. There can be no witnesses to this rescue effort. Send orders to the cruisers. Al-Haquiz and Sarkos. Target the entire group, but hold fire until I give the word. Yes, sir. Designate Wraith targets Sigma 1 and 2. Atron designated Gulf 1. God damn it, Jovians. Karth fumed. If they aren't shooting, then what are they doing? Navigation. Yes, sir. Close range on the impervious. Best possible speed. Tacklers. Another static-laced response echoed through the bridge speakers. Tackler Squadron, standing by. Your primary target is the battleship Impervious, Karth hissed. The tactical display indicated that the storm was almost on top of the Amarian battle group, and that their escape window was narrowing quickly. He was never more bloodthirsty in his entire life than he was right in this moment. Get into scramble range as quickly as possible. Our gunners will neutralize their cruisers in just a few moments. I want that ship's momentum stopped. Do you understand? Affirmative. On our way. The 6 Slasher-class frigates that made up the Tackler Squadron broke away from the main group, heading directly towards the Impervious. Their progress was marked with 6 black triangles on the tactical display. Admiral, the tactical officer interrupted. The Sarkos and Al-Haquiz reported null targeting solutions for Sigma or Gulf. The Jovians are too close to Omicron 1. Rifter Captain, this is Jovian Frigate at your 6, the voice started. You cannot navigate this approach. Requesting permission to commandeer your flight controls. The pilot of Omicron 1 was just as furious as she was terrified. Back off! I'm opening fire, she shrieked. The crippled Atron was flying alongside her, and a Jovian Wraith was easing towards the front of the formation, perfectly matching the Rifter's speed when its tail section positioned over the canopy. The second Wraith remained directly behind the group. Every ship in the pack was 10 or less meters away from each other. It was, unequivocally, the most skillful flying the pilot had ever seen. But this was not the time for compliments. The voice spoke again in an eerie calm. Rifter Captain, we have the skills and technology to safely navigate your ship through the storm and into the Amarian compound. Allow us to help you. I said, get the fuck out of here, she ordered. You're going to get us all The pilot gasped and yanked backwards on the flight stick as a giant asteroid rolled into view. The Rifter barely cleared it, and as she pointed the nose back towards the vector indicated on the canopy, the Atron and Wraiths immediately took an exact same position around her ship as before. The same voice spoke again without urgency or emotion. Captain, you cannot do this, and you have no choice but to trust us. We are taking your flight controls right now. She flipped open the safety that would activate the frigate's gun turrets, and then screamed as more asteroids tumbled towards the canopy in direct collision course. The Rifter ignored her frantic yank backwards on the flight stick and instead rolled downwards, smoothly averting a catastrophe. Domain region, Throne World's constellation, the Amar system, planet Oris, Emperor Family Academy Station, Imperial Navy Virtual Command Center. Grand Admiral Mekioth Sorum rested his hands on the circular tablet, observing a holographic tactical display of the situation above Demnon and listening to the report from Commodore Akrydon.
The Jovians interfered with my justice. Saved the Galente. The Minotaur battle group warped in. At the same time, my lord.
An interesting opportunity presents itself, Mekioth thought, focusing his eyes on the small cluster of dots moving away from the main Minotaur force. Where are those frigates going, Commodore?
Directly towards the complex main port. We cannot raise anyone on the inside. Warn them, because the meteor impact on the surface. My lord, my fleet is great danger because of Girl Shaitan. Permission to disengage. Return when the storm passes.
This opportunity shall not be wasted. Permission denied, Commodore. The Galente ship must be destroyed, as with the Minotaur frigates heading towards the Demnon surface. Mekio thought for a moment, and the bodies of the priests must also be recovered, no matter the cost. A loud burst of static resonated throughout the darkened chamber, and the tactical display on the table flickered. Mekioth looked around the room and allowed himself to smile. Divine protest, perhaps? I think not. Did you hear me, Commodore?
Yes, my lord. But what about the lives of my crew? You must understand what you're asking.
Mekioth became enraged. Are you questioning me, Commodore? There was a pause.
No, my lord.
Yes, Mekioth answered. Or good, Mekioth answered. I shall inform Emperor Hadrian and the Federation's treachery and your heroic promise to return the corpses of our holy men for proper burial. The display flickered again.
It will be done, my lord.
What happened? There. Oh, I can go left and right. That's good. The cluster of red circles on the display marking the densest concentration of asteroids in the belt was closing in on Akrydon's battle group. It had better be, Commodore. Foss Akrydon could not believe his ears. The officers on the bridge were ghastly pale, understanding just as well as he that Grand Admiral Sorum had just ordered their deaths. Foss stared at the tactical display and silently acknowledged the hopelessness of what he just asked, or rather ordered, to do. There was no longer enough time to warp the ship out of harm's way. My God, Foss thought, have I just been sacrificed or betrayed? Navigation. Yes, my lord. The officer, a younger man in his late 20s, whose name was Durovon, snapped to attention. Faust could sense that he was afraid to die, but would remain committed to his duty until the end. Have faith, lad. Paradise is waiting. Turn 45 degrees to port and put us broadside to the asteroids. Sound the evacuation alarm. All non-essential personnel are to abandon ship immediately. Faust paused for a moment, observing the shocked expressions of his officers. None of them had ever imagined a day when their blessed admiral would give such an order. Instruct the crew that only starboard-facing life rafts and escape pods will be jettisoned. They'll stand a much better chance of survival by ejecting towards Demnon than they will into that meteor storm. Lieutenant Daravon's eyes glassed over. Then he started barking orders to his own subordinates. Alarm klaxons rang throughout the impervious as the abandoned ship orders was announced across all decks. Thousands of crew members left their battle stations and posts and started evacuation procedures that none of them had ever imagined that they would need for real. Lights were starting to appear among the right-hand side of the schematic detailing the impervious projected on the forward bridge screen. The first life rafts, each one holding up to 50 crew members, were already away. Foss grimaced at the line of cruiser-sized asteroids bearing down on his fleet. Engineering! A gruff voice responded. Standing by, my lord. Ah, Donovus, you will be missed. I'm giving you 2/3 of the capacitor reserves to generate as much shield strength as you can. The more punishment that they can absorb, the more time that we have to get people off the ship. Anything for you, my lord. Foss fought back tears. The more lights began dotting the schematics. Only a skeleton crew remained to man their stations for the Impervious's final battle. These men are prepared to die for me, and this is where I lead them to. He turned his attention to the Mimitar attack frigates speeding towards the battle group. Mauler 1, do you copy? By my lord. Send your fastest ship to recover the bodies of our priests in the wreckage. They are to disengage and return immediately to the throne worlds. Send the remaining cruisers to intercept the Mimitar attack frigates. You are weapons free. Engage at will. Roger, engaging. Foss watched the display as the solitary cruiser broke away from the main fleet, while the remaining ships moved towards Mimitar battle group, filling the space between with missiles. Weapons. Range to November 1. 68 kilometers, my lord. Too far away for a direct hit, Faust thought, running the mental calculations as he concentrated on the tactical display, unless the salvo is perfectly placed. Assign November 1 to turrets 1 through 7. Radio crystals, dead reckoning solution, plus 3-second look ahead. 1 broadside only, do you understand? Affirmative. Dead reckoning plus 3 ticks. 1 broadside only. Weapons, as soon as you fire, swing your guns to port. Switch your multispectrals and target the largest asteroid bearing down on us. You are weapons free after this shot. Understood? Yes, sir. Weapons free after broadside of November 1. The officer directed the men and women below him as the enormous tachyon cannons mounted on the Impervious began tracking slowly in the same direction. Tracking, my lord. Fire! The terrified pilots of Omicron 1 watched as several bright red beams lanced across the space directly in front of the lead Wraith. 5 of them struck an asteroid the size of a cruiser and broke into 3 main chunks plus a hail of smaller debris. The Rifter rolled and dived, just barely avoiding a collision with the 2 largest fragments as they careened past the canopy. Then a brilliant flash illuminated the asteroids in front of her as the same fragment slammed into Omicron 2, destroying the frigate instantly. Admiral, Omicron 2 is down, the Hellwraith tactical officer said. Ignore it, Karth growled. It was over for them before it even started. Range to the Maulers? 47 kilometers. Designate Mike 1 through 5. The weapon officers answered. Put the turrets on Mike 1 and the launchers on Mike 2. Give each 2 salvos and work your way down the others as necessary. All guns open fire. All cruisers engage at will. Yes, sir. Engaging. The floor underneath the bridge shuddered as the Hellwraith's artillery cannons hurled 1,400 millimeter shells at the first Mauler, easily overwhelming the cruiser's shields and pulverizing the Amarian vessel on the first salvo. As his weapons officers changed targets, Karth turned back to the Impervious. Tacklers, range to target. Activating stasis webs. Warp scramblers now, sir. From his vantage point on the bridge, Karth could see the Impervious glowing in a bluish-white aura. All of the battle shield's forward momentum was quickly negated as it passed through the stasis web, slowing down steadily until it was completely stopped. The turrets alongside the warship's portside hull were arcing white multispectral beams across the massive asteroids hurtling towards her, and the contours of her shields were clearly visible as the smaller meteors and fragments broke through the tachyons in an epic fireworks display. The Impervious was in her final moments, and it was just a matter of time before she became the victim of a fate worthy of the Amar scriptures, literally being stoned to death. All Karth could see were those same exact tachyon beams incinerating his son on the planet Iana. His enormous hands curled into tight fists, and he became so angered that he began to tremble. The destruction of the Impervious could not happen soon enough. Die, Acheridon, he thought. Die the horrible death that you deserve, you fucking Amarian coward. The voice of a tackler pilot broke his vengeful fixation on the Impervious. Sir, we cannot hold this orbit for much longer. Incoming asteroids will kill us. Karth was indifferent to the pilot's plea. You are prepared to die a good death like the rest of us, Valkyr. Hold that stasis web on the target until I say otherwise. He had barely finished speaking when the 4 signals disappeared from the tactical display. 2 of them were Amarian cruisers, the latest victim of the Hellwraith's awesome firepower. The other 2 were tackler frigates, blotted out of space by asteroids more than twice their size. But Karth was oblivious to their loss. His sharp eyes, wide with sadistic delight, were locked onto the Impervious's death blow, now just moments away from impact. Faust saw the behemoth asteroid, more than 3,000 meters across in his estimation, and started to prepare his soul for the afterlife. The 7 tachyon beams converging on its gray surface did little more than to burrow deep craters into the ravine as the weapons officers tried desperately to ward off the inevitable. Faust realized that it was time to clear his conscience. "Save yourselves! Get to the escape pods, now!" The officers, all drenched with sweat and sharing a desperate disposition, exchanged glances and raised an alarm in Faust. None of them moved towards the bridge's exit. Lieutenant Duravan took a step towards him. Faust withdrew his pistol. "Did you hear what I said? Please, save yourself. You have at most 30 seconds. My place is with this ship." The officers rushed towards Faust, who was so unprepared for their actions that he merely dropped his gun. Grabbing him firmly by the arms, they started to rush him off the bridge. Clamping his hands firmly around Faust's wrist, Lieutenant Duravan spoke first. "Forgive us, my lord, but this must be done." Faust struggled against them, but they were too strong. "Stop! You are my responsibility. You have a chance to go on." Donovus was waiting for them at the bridge's exit, pointing towards the officer's ejection pod, located at the aft of the bulkhead doorway. Another officer returned the pistol that Faust dropped, forcibly thrusting it into his holster. "'Tis you that must go, my lord," Donovus said. "These orders came from the Emperor himself. If anything were to happen to you on my watch, he would certainly have us killed. You are like a son to him, and to us you have been a father." The men shoved Faust headfirst into the escape pod and sealed the doorway. Getting back to his feet, he lunged back into the seal, banging his fist on the portal. "No! Save yourselves, I beg you!" Donovus cleared his intercom button. "We're nearly on top of the Demnon main port. Your escape pod will autopilot there. May the hand of God steer away from asteroids in your path. The guards inside the complex will look after you until help arrives. After the Grushaton passes. It has been an honor to serve you, Commodore Arydan. For the sake of Amar, live on." Darkness engulfed Faust as the outer seal closed. The lead wraith abruptly veered upwards, slipping in between a cluster of asteroids and then tipping back over into a vertical dive towards the surface. The entire canopy view was filled with the sight of an enormous crater some 20 kilometers wide, with steep ridges along the perimeter that jutted upwards from the surface for at least 3 kilometers. The pilot could not tell how deep it was, but far below the surface were tiny orange pools of magma, and the frigate group was descending directly towards them. Finally, Hell's Gate, the pilot thought, and only half of us survived. "Talon Command," he said. "This is Omicron 1. We're inside. Repeat. We're inside Hell's Gate." The pilot suddenly regained control of the rifter, and then he saw the two wraiths abruptly reverse directions and accelerate back out of the cavern. Struggling to keep her eyes on the pair through the rear-view display, the twisting, turning Jovian frigates vanished into the meteor storm. Faust watched in horror as the Goliath asteroid slammed into the forward section of the Impervious, crushing the bow superstructure and breaking the battleship's keel cleanly in half. For a moment, the two segments of the dashed vessel drifted away from each other, spraying a stream of fiery debris into space like gushing arteries before exploding in a blinding flash of light. Faust, his eyes stinging from the brightness of the blast, turned away from the disaster and collapsed to his knees. He whispered a prayer for the helpless souls that were left on board, and lamented to God that he should have met his fate on that ship as well. A loud metallic clank turned the blood in Faust's veins to ice. Scrambling to his feet, he squinted through the portal, expecting to see asteroids, but instead finding the greenish-black hull of a Jovian wraith. "Impervious," Karth mused, spitting towards the forward bridge portals as the explosion faded. "My work here is finished." 2 more tackler frigates disappeared from the tactical display as meteor storm intensified. He toggled a switch on the captain's chair. "Attention all ships. This is Talon Command. Warp to 5th moon of Hyel 4. Regroup there and wait for my command. Tactical. Any word on the status of Omicron 1? Yes, sir. They just entered Hell's Gate. One last detail to take care of before we leave this forsaken place. Quickly, patch me through to them." Vlad could not believe that he was still alive. Glancing around the cabin, he could tell from the soldiers' expressions that they shared his amazement. But their eyes also betrayed the sorrow for the Valkyrs who met their sudden fate aboard Omicron 2. It was instantaneous for them, he thought. What a tragic waste, losing them like that. Warriors such as these deserve to die with weapons in their hands, not strapped across their chest. The radio earpiece buzzed. It was Admiral Karth Mutana. The transmission was barely audible with all the static, but instructions were clear.
Alcaron, make sure you secure the landing pad first. Captain Kinshrev, I want the Jovians killed. Be no witnesses to this operation. Your direction with the Galentic pilot gets in the way. Authorized to terminate as well. Elders, top priority. Make myself clear?
The transmission was lost before Vlad was able to answer. The frigate lurched forward with a light burst of speed, and the cabin light turned red as the harness straps securing the soldiers unlocked. Objective 1. Kill the Jovians, Vlad thought, motioning quickly with the hand signals of the soldiers to fix silencers to their weapons. I don't think that's ever been done before. Domain region, Throne World's constellation, the Amar system, planet Oris, Emperor Family Academy Station, Imperial Navy Virtual Command Center. The tactical display frizzled and then abruptly vanished. As the words "Signal Lost" hung over the console, Grand Admiral Mekio Sorum contemplated the consequences of his action. A martyr's death for the beloved Commodore, he thought, killed while attempting to rescue a council apostle. Amar will mourn, but in time his memory will pass. Foss Akradon's bloodline connection to the Khador family made him a legitimate candidate to succeed Emperor Hadrian. Alive for more than 4 centuries, the Emperor's death could happen at any time, even if the machines sustaining his life were capable of doing so for hundreds of years more. Time would catch up on him eventually. Whenever it did, Mekioth wanted the Sorum family prepared to seize power. Akradon would have been Khador's most worthy champion, Mekioth thought, toggling the star map of the Agu constellation. Even in martyrdom, he is dangerous. Several Imperial battle groups were converged on the Hyel guarding the stargates, or were converging on High Hill, guarding the stargates leading in and establishing blockades in the neighboring system. The hunt for Mimitar strike force responsible for the death of Amar's greatest hero was on, and once Grul Shatan passed, the battalion of paladins would raid the mining camp to deal with the rebels inside. Martyr or not, the Sorum family will claim the throne someday, Mekio thought. The map panned out, then moved across the vast expanse of stars beyond the Jovian border. He ran his hands through the image, imagining the riches waiting to be tapped there. Foss Akradon helped me conquer the Mimitar. In death, he will help me conquer the Jovians as well. Chapter 4. Hey, no problem, Teef. Yeah, like I said, we're going to put these out probably as chapters. Put the sexy and dyslexia. Got it. We are going to continue Theodicy, Chapter 4. Which test reveals more of the soul? The test that man will take to prove his faith, or the test that finds the man who believed his faith already proven? If you know this answer, then you also know which of these challenges bear the greatest penalty for failure. The gates of paradise will open for you one time only. Woe to the soul who dares to knock twice. Book of Missions, 514, the Scriptures. Throughout history, the militaries of civilizations have created soldiers from the ranks of able-bodied in their society. The Mimitar, having lost most of their able-bodied to death or slavery, tried this approach and found the results unsatisfactory for their own special needs. Instead, they took their most notorious villains, their thieves, schemers, and murderers, and turned them into soldiers. They called these men Valkyrs. Federal Intelligence Office Archives, classified. Document NJ-TAC F22. History of Mimitar Infantry Development. Derelict region. Agu constellation. The High Hill system. Demnon planetesimal. Demnon mining complex. Main hangar bay. Jumping down from the ramp, Vlad sprinted away from the Rifter's landing skids and moved towards the rock outcrops along the tarmac's edge. Behind him, the other Valkyrs spread outwards in groups of 2, seeking cover that would give them a clear line of sight with the immense tunnel leading back outside to the docking vent. Some began darting up the steep rock to face the hangar's walls, quickly nestling into ledges and disappearing into the shadows cast by the floodlights high above them. Vlad found a spot behind some rocks well above the tarmac, across from the hangar seals leading to the complex. The Rifter was resting on the pad with its boarding ramp intentionally left open. The hope was that the Jovians would assume that they had already entered the complex, thus drawing them out from the safety of their own ships and into the crosshairs of the Valkyr rifles. Several clicks in his earpiece indicated that each of the soldiers was in place, waiting for his orders. They were more than 30 kilometers below the surface, yet Vlad could still hear muted rumbles from the crash of meteors high above. To conserve resources, the Amarians were not replenishing any of the air that escaped whenever the outer airlock opened for a ship to enter the hangar. For now, a man could still breathe inside without an aid of a mask, but any exertion would wind him immediately. The next time the seal opened, which it would at any second to allow the Jovian frigates inside, what little air remained would escape. Peering through the scope of his rifle, Vlad scanned the area. The hangar was an enormous cave carved into the Demnon's mantle by Amarian explosives and on the back of Minmatar slaves. 3 sets of stabilizer rigs, spaced about 700 meters apart, were built into both walls, one of each of the Bestower-class industrials that could dock here to unload cargo and haul unprecedented ore back outside. The hangar's dimensions were designed specifically to accommodate this ship. It was impossible for anything larger to get inside. Moving the crosshairs towards the Rifter, Vlad noticed bloodstains scattered all over the tarmac. That prison riot must have ended here, he thought, taking note of the different kinds of patterns. There were darkened pools marking the graves where main victims bled to death, the fine mist spray patterns caused by gunshot wounds, the heavier droplet patterns indicating blunt impacts delivered by fists or heavy objects. Without question, this place was a scene of gruesome violence that claimed the lives of dozens of people. A good death for these slaves, Vlad thought, attaching the scope back onto his rifle. To meet death while killing Amarians was the most these people could ask for. A gust of air blew some dust up from the ground as 2 sets of lights pierced the blackness at the end of the tunnel. Vlad spotted Thrumgar, a short distance from him in the ledges, swinging his claw combat light assault weapon over the side and popping it against the stone. He better handle himself well early on, Vlad thought, or else we're just going to become another stain on the tarmac. Time to awaken, Viola. The voice came from one of the faceless souls surrounding her in the barren field. The crypt was just ahead, with the corpse of the unidentified hero waiting inside. A hand from the crowd reached out and touched hers. Terrified, Viola took a step backwards. Open your eyes. Slowly. She turned in the direction that the hand had reached out from, and as she opened her eyes, a face began to take shape on one of the spirits standing beside her. Jet black eyes surrounded by pale white flesh, marred with dark veins that originated from the scalp and branched all the way down to the jawbone. Viola startled, taking a short breath. The creature's hands moved gently over her mouth. Your first encounter with a Jovian, I see. His voice had a synthetic tone to it, with a pitch that was as eerie as it was soothing. A difficult sight for your breed to absorb. It is understandable. Viola realized that she was laying on her back, and the Jovian was standing over her. As she removed his hand, she noticed that his skin did not feel like organic tissue. Glass, she thought. It looks and feels like wet glass. My name is Grius, and I am here to protect you and assist the Minmatars with their mission to rescue the Elders. What the hell, she thought? Protect me? Taking a quick inventory of her body, Viola felt some mild soreness in her chest and legs, but it was her eyes that hurt more than anything else. You were subjected to enormous G-force when your ship lost control, Grius said, helping her off the table. Some of the capillaries in your eyes burst, which explains your appearance. I lacked the equipment needed to repair them here, but I was able to repair numerous ruptures to the muscle linings along your diaphragm, abdominal wall, and blood vessels in your legs. What's wrong with my appearance? Viola asked, getting to her feet slowly. The room was small, but packed with strange equipment that was unlike anything she had ever seen. Grius waved his hand, and a screen materialized from the wall. I know this obsession with your kind has with appearance. Come this way, please. Viola took a few hesitated steps forward. The Jovian was slender and stood less than 180 centimeters tall. His entire body, save for his head and hands, was covered in an armored suit. She began to feel uncomfortable at the sight of those bottomless orbs staring through her. Turning towards the screen, Viola gasped when she saw her reflection, the whiteness of her eyes blood red. "They will heal with time, and your vision should remain unaffected," Grace said, taking her gently by the hand once more. "You have the pilot of this ship to thank for saving your life." "I'm on a ship?" she asked herself, resisting the urge to pull her hand away. "You mean you're not the pilot?" Viola asked, running her fingers along her eyelids. "No, but he is listening," Grius said as several doors slid open in front of them. "You can speak to him if you wish." By the way, by this point in time in the history, I don't believe that the Jove have given the capsule to the Caldari. So most of the Empire denizens have never actually seen a capsule before. "This is crazy," she thought, looking up towards the hallway lights. "Thank you?" A voice just as eerie as Grius resonated through the hall, and door behind them closed. "You are welcome, Viola." "May I speak with him directly?" she asked. "I feel like I should express my gratitude in person." Another door opened, leading to the cabin with higher ceilings than the hallway. The room was illuminated with red lights, and the metallic walls were covered with ominous markings and electronics. "Not here, I'm afraid," Grius said, tightening his grip slightly. "Step where I step, Viola. This chamber is different from the others." The back of her neck began to tingle as something caught her eyes. The walls, she realized, were distorted. "Either I'm still high," she thought, "or I swear we're not the only people in here." The pilot's voice echoed through the cabin. "Prepare to disembark." Grius handed her a mouthpiece with two small cylinders attached to the side. "Put this in your mouth and breathe through it. Avoid taking in air through your nose for the time being. Speak through it as you normally would. It will stay in place unless you use your hands to remove it." "Where are we?" Viola asked, dreading the answer. A seal of light appeared at the end of the cabin, growing wider until a grayish-brown surface, a landing pad, was clearly visible. Grius led her towards it as she put the mouthpiece in. "Demnon," he said, stepping onto the surface. "Inside the Amarian mining complex." "Wait, what?" Viola hesitated, but then was gently pulled towards the tarmac by Grius. "I was just on a goddamn wraith," she thought, recognizing the distinct hull shape above her as she was herded down the boarding ramp. "No one has ever been this close before, let alone inside one." 200 meters in front of them was the Mimitar Rifter, also resting on the tarmac. Viola noticed immediately that its boarding ramp was lowered as well, but did not see anyone else nearby. She sensed that the air was thin and took several deep breaths to become adjusted to the mouthpiece. "You don't need one of these to breathe?" "You don't need one of these to breathe?" she asked. Grius was staring at the rocky cavern far from the Mimitar ship, his head tilted slightly from one side. "Our anatomy differs from yours in more ways than just appearance," he answers. "Come with me. I have something to show you." As they walked towards the boarding ramp section of the frigate's hull, Viola saw the remains of the Atron about 100 meters away. The aft segment of the ship was gone, and the rest of the hull was blackened. Some sections of armor plating were missing. Others hung from the crippled ship by a few strands of twisted metal. The only part of the battered frigate that appeared intact was the bubble canopy. "How the hell did I survive that?" Viola's voice was enhanced through the speaker of the mouthpiece. Grius was leading her along the length of the wraith, away from the rifter, and towards the direction of the tunnel. She suddenly felt a sharp longing for one of her painkillers. "The odds of surviving a direct hit from a tachyon beam in that ship is exactly 0, he answered. Viola could see the fuselage of the second wraith a few meters ahead. "You survived because the Amarian gunners were inaccurate." "The Amarians took a shot at me?" Viola remembered the Imperial Navy battle fleet that showed up right after. I didn't kill those people," Viola blurted, recalling some gruesome visage of the corpses floating in the debris of the bestower. "My ship wasn't even armed." "We know you did not," Grius interrupted. "But it was to make it look that way, by design." The Order, Viola thought. But do the Jovians know? She stopped dead in her tracks as the second wraith came into full view. Like the one that she had emerged from, its boarding ramp was also open, but lying as its base was a full-grown man, bound with his hands behind his back. His head and shoulders were covered in cloth. He was resting on his knees. Grius, who is... He has not been harmed, Grius said, ushering her forward. Tell me, what do you call them? The cryptic ones who lured you to this place. Viola paused. The Order. I'm not even sure what they call themselves. We have been pursuing them for some time, Grius said. They are elusive and extremely dangerous. Is there anything more you wish to tell me about them? The question sent a chill up Viola's spine. That was a command, not a question. There's nothing more to tell, she answered, looking towards the captive. He seemed unaware that they were standing so close to him. They first contacted me years ago, giving me perfect information about Amarian movements and operations in Minmatar space. Viola heard a distant rumble that sounded vaguely like thunder. Ever since then, they would only contact me randomly, with leads that were priceless. Priceless for whom? Grius was facing her directly, staring with the soulless black eyes. For the Minmatar, she answered nervously. He already knows the answers to these questions. I passed along everything I felt could help them to avoid this reclaiming debacle. Grius turned towards the rifter again as more rumbles echoed through the hangar. The man kneeling beside you is the one who gave the order to destroy your ship. Would you like to know his name? Viola was caught off guard by the question. I'm sorry? Commodore Foss Akridon of the Imperial Navy, Grius said. I imagine that you know much of him. What? Viola explained, whirling around towards the hooded prisoner. That's impossible! How could... The elders are also here. Somewhere in the catacombs below. And hidden in those rocks are the Minmatar soldiers sent to rescue them. Grius paused. As we speak, they have their weapons trained on us and are waiting for the right chance to kill us both. The blood left Viola's face. Kill us? Do not fear, Grius said, clasping his hands behind his back. At no point since arriving in my care have you been in any danger. But shouldn't we get back inside the ship? Viola asked, taking a shallow breath through the mouthpiece. Someone needs to tell them that we're trying to help. That is the plan, Grius answered. But it will take more than negotiation skill to convince them of our good intentions. Viola looked towards the rocks. There was absolutely nothing obstructing her line of sight with the rifter or the massive cavern walls surrounding them. Well, then who's going to do it? You? Viola, Grius said, again turning his black eyes towards her. You and I were not alone when we left the ship. Vlad had heard a series of clicks in his earpiece, each of them a separate request to open fire. The Jovians and woman were standing out in the open, talking casually and seeming oblivious to the dangers surrounding them. But who the hell is that prisoner? Vlad wondered, clicking back an order for the soldiers to wait. Just a few minutes earlier, the two Jovians had descended the boarding ramp of the second Wraith, deposited a prisoner on the surface, and then walked back up. There has to be more of them, he thought, moving the scope's crosshairs back towards the first Wraith. Patience is key, but we have to get inside the complex soon. As the crosshairs moved across the boarding ramp, Vlad saw something dart across the viewfinder that made him flinch. Looking off the scope towards the tarmac, he saw 4 separate distortions that reminded him of roiled air over hot surface. Danger, Vlad sensed, as Thrumgar's claw fired several rounds that kicked up debris from the surface below. The earpiece erupted with shouts as Vlad snapped his rifle towards Thrumgar's position. What the fuck is he shooting at? Kurgan demanded. There's something coming right towards me, Thrumgar screamed, putting the claw into full automatic and spraying rounds wildly in front of him. Vlad spanned his rifle left and right, desperately seeking a target but finding none. More machine gun bursts illuminated the cavern wall as the other soldiers shouted and fired their silenced weapons into the shadow. Just as Vlad took a breath to speak, he saw Thrumgar's claw inexplicably throw itself from its hands. The giant man appeared to freeze for a moment, then drop, gently, as if hands were guiding him, face down on the ground. Then Vlad felt it, Then Vlad felt it. A draft of air on the back of his neck that shouldn't have been there, and reacted solely on instinct. In one fluid motion, he thrust the rifle backwards as hard as he could and felt the stock slam into a man. Ignoring the strange-sounding grunt, Vlad whirled 180 degrees to his left, unsheathing the kritak in mid-spin with his right hand and exploding forward in a lunge. There was nothing in front of him that the eyes could see, but Vlad's senses told him otherwise. His left forearm caught something heavy on its way up to block an invisible counterstrike, but his right hand, clenching the knife tightly and keeping the blade parallel to the ground, continued unobstructed in a wide arc until it punctured something thick, right where a man's rib cage would be. An ear-piercing howl filled the cavern as a Jovian soldier materialized at the hilt of the knife. Just as Vlad commanded his wrist to twist the blade, he felt something strike his lower back, and then all of the muscles in his body went numb. Panic overwhelmed him as he fell backwards, completely paralyzed. He did not feel himself hit the ground, but saw the silhouette of a second Jovian standing over him a moment later. Domain region. Throne World constellation. The Amar system. Planet Oris. Emperor Family Academy Station. St. Kurea, the Prophet Cathedral. Grand Admiral Mekioth Sorum moved past the royal guards and entered the great cathedral. Its vaulted ceilings stood more than 50 meters high, supported by dozens of massively columned, lavishly carved with scenes carved with scenes depicted from the scriptures. Seated at the center of the cathedral was Emperor Hadrian, adorned with religious pageantry and affixed permanently to his throne. Numerous cybernetic devices were visible on his head, neck, and shoulders, all of which were required to keep him alive. More than 4 centuries old, and he still lives, Mekioth thought, approaching the altar. With any luck at all, Amar will not have to suffer under his incompetence of his rule much longer. My lord, Mekioth said, kneeling before Hadrian and bowing his head as hooded priests looked on. Arise, Grand Admiral, Hadrian said, motioning with his ancient hand. The priests moved silently towards the antechamber at each corner of the floor. You summoned me? Mekioth said, standing slowly. Hadrian's voice was old, but steady as he spoke. I have heard terrible news about the Impervious, Mekioth. Why was he sent to that dreadful place? Mekioth took a deep breath before speaking. My lord, surely you know of the disappearance of our apostle Taj Rukan and his disciples? Of course, Hadrian answered. Have you found them? I loathe bringing you such bad news, but they are dead, Mekioth replied, feigning dismayed. Commodore Archiridon received a distress signal from their ship and set out immediately to rescue them. Ah, Foss, Hadrian breathed. Tell me what his role in this. Tell me what his role was in this. He followed the signal to Demnon, where he witnessed the murder firsthand. What? Hadrian nearly coughed. Who dared to do this? The rebels? The act is inconceivable, my lord, but the savagery was committed by the Galente Federation. Hadrian paused, his eyes widened in shock. You have proof of this? We have footage taken from the Impervious, Mekioth said, disciplining himself to convey shock and anger. It clearly shows a Federation frigate in attack position, just as the Apostles' Bestower exploded. Moments later, Mimitar rebels appeared, and their so-called Valkyr fleet, escorted by Jovian ships. Jovians? Hadrian's throne detached from the locking braces and floated down from the altar. You are certain of this? Yes, my lord. The Impervious successfully attacked the Galente ship, but the Jovians intervened and prevented its outright destruction. I ordered Commodore Acridon to retreat immediately, but he what, Admiral? Tell me! Mekioth looked downward. He insisted on recovering the bodies of the priests, saying that they deserved a proper burial in preparation for their passage to heaven. He was hopelessly outnumbered, and the Grushatan's storm was upon him. No, Hadrian said. Don't tell me. My lord, the Impervious was destroyed, along with her escorts. We cannot launch a search and rescue mission until the storm passes. Hadrian was devastated. Faust, my son. We have not abandoned all hope, but given the violent nature of the storm and the numbers of rebel ships involved, it seems unlikely that... Mekioth did not have to finish the sentence. Emperor Hadrian wept. taking shallow breaths and convulsing intermittently with wheezes. There were no tears, as his ancient body was no longer capable of producing them. My lord, I am sorry. He was a hero of Amar, and the best captain I have ever known. We must avenge his death. What do you think must be done? We are hunting the rebel fleet as we speak. The Hyel system is quarantined, but I must ask your permission to fire upon any Gallente or Jovian ships that we encounter around Demnon. Emperor Hadrian flinched. I object to that. The Gallente could have been a rogue. We must not haste. My lord, the Federation is engaged in a full-scale war with the Caldari state that they are winning. This act, rogue or not, is in itself an act of war, and your subjects will demand action. We cannot afford to tolerate such aggressions within our borders. The throne turned away from Mechioth and faced the great statue of Prophet Kuria, surrounded by angels in depiction of paradise. And what of the Jovians? How do you propose we deal with them? I am preparing a battle plan, and once I determine the full extent of Jovian involvement with this massacre, I shall make them known to you. Emperor Hadrian turned to face Mechioth again, looking him over slowly. Very well, Grand Admiral. You have permission to fire upon Gallente ships, but only in the immediate vicinity of Demnon, and only against any ships that attempt to run your blockades. Mechioth bowed his head. Thank you, my lord. I will not rest until the murderers are brought to justice. Find him, Mechioth, Hadrian whispered. Bring his body back to me. I will do everything I can, my lord. They bounded down the cavern walls, effortlessly carrying the incapacitated Minmatar commandos across the tarmac and setting them on their knees at the base of the first wraith. Viola stared in amazement at the pure strength and conditioning of these Jovians. She still could not bring herself to call them men, as they were made trip after trip to recover the bodies. In little more than a few minutes since the first shots were fired, there were now 8 Minmatar commandos bound shoulder to shoulder, hands behind their backs and kneeling directly across from the Amarian captive. Graeus disappeared into the with the wounded Jovian into the wraith. Viola stared at the captives, all of which were slowly regaining sensation in their limbs. Valkyries, Viola thought, looking over their faces and studying their appearance. Overly muscular, no identification or rank insignia, tribal markings strewn across their arms, neck, and face. Minmatar's best soldiers, each of them converted psychopath or murderer. The only woman among them was the pilot, several years younger than herself, with dark hair, light-colored eyes, sharp features, and just as physically robust as the others. She was breathing through a device provided by Graeus, as was the other soldiers in flight suits. They were still wearing their own masks. Oh, as was one other soldier in flight suits. The rest were still wearing their own masks. What happened to your eyes? The deep voice startled her. The strongest of the group, the one who had somehow managed to stab a cloaked Jovian, was staring at her. They were injured when my ship was shot down, Viola said, turning to face the Valkyr. Even kneeling, his head was level with her chin. This man was enormous. The Jovians saved my life, and yours as well. The man grunted. So you were the pilot of the Acheron, he says, raising himself more upright. It seems we share a common enemy. What's your name, Gallente? Viola looked over the man before answering. Viola Antiones. Antiones. And I'm with the Federal Intelligence Office. Do you have... I know that name, he said, lowering his eyes. Other Valkyrs were beginning to squirm against the restraints. You're the one they call Jarua Kiltra. Viola's eyes opened a little wider. She understood the translation well. Seer of horrors, she breathed. The soldier appeared surprised. You speak our language, he said. What they say of you is true, then. Va nakir kra tua chinak? She asked. What is your name, Valkyr? The man paused, and the slightest beginnings of a smile formed on his lips. You can call me Vlad. We are all in your debt. Then it is time to go on the offensive. I've spent my entire life trying to help your race, Viola said, raising her voice slightly, and yet you were prepared to kill me just a few minutes ago. Why? Some of the soldiers looked towards Vlad. I did not know who you were, and was unsure of your intentions. I know about the elders, Viola snapped back, suddenly feeling another sharp pang for drugs. All of the soldiers fixed their stares onto her, as do the Jovians. There is no secret to us how important they are to you. We are all here for the same reason, to help you to get them out. The pilot of the Rifter spoke up. We don't need your help. Just release us and leave this place. Ziara, Vlad shouted, glaring at the pilot. She shot a glare back, then slumped back down and turned her frown towards Viola. Please forgive her tenacity, he said, lowering his voice. She should not make that tone with you. But with all due respect, we prefer to go alone from here. Such a proud race, Grius said, emerging from the wraith. He was holding Vlad's Kritak, and 3 of the 4 original Jovian soldiers who had subdued the Valkyrs flanked him as he walked. I see now why the elders are so crucial to the survival of your kind. We're here because of what happened to Iana, Viola said, looking towards the hooded Amarian. Best to keep his identity quiet for now, she thought, even though I'd love to leave him here alone with the Valkyrs for a few minutes. This is the endgame for the Mimitar, and the elders were on the brink of uniting all of the tribes of the Republic. You need them now more than ever, so stop being so goddamn stubborn and let us help you. Viola, a word with you in private, please, Grius said, motioning for her to walk up the ramp. Puzzled at her own outburst, she complied, leaving the surprised Valkyrs to themselves. I need a fucking pill right now, she thought, contemplating asking the Joves for something, anything, to satisfy the need. Grius peered into her eyes as he spoke. You are addicted to painkillers, he said matter-of-factly. Are you even aware that your hands are shaking? Viola looked at her hands. A visible tremor was running through both of them. The Serpentis lace their drugs with chemicals designed to enhance addictive properties, Grius said. Typically, withdrawal symptoms for someone with your physical characteristics would not begin for several hours at least. But in your case, with your repeated ingestion due to habit, they have begun already. Well, shit. Look, we don't have time for this. But if you happen to have any more pills... We do not, Viola. You are already at the threshold level of drugs I can safely administer to treat your pain without risking incapacitation. We cannot detoxify your bloodstream here. So what are my options? She said. You are a liability now, and you will continue to display increasing agitation until you reach psychosis, assuming the high blood pressure and heightened body temperature do not cripple you first. Then leave me with Arydanika, Viola answered. I want to have a few words with him. Grius tilted his head to one side. What do you expect to gain from doing so? You are not trained interrogator, and he will only repeat his name, rank, and prayers when addressed. Viola looked behind her at the slumped figure under the cloth and could see that the Valkyrs were becoming impatient. I can't explain why, she said, rubbing her forehead. I just want to get inside the mind of this zealot to try to understand the thinking that goes into the decision to bombard a planet. The Jovian stared at her for a moment, thinking about what she said. So, this too is also by their design. The ones you call the Order. A confluence of events orchestrated to produce an outcome desirable to them. He paused for a moment to look down the ramp towards Arydanika. No coincidence at all that we are permitted to save him. He has a role in this scheme. And do you, apparently. Grius, what are you talking about? Viola asked, craving a soothing rush of painkiller. This is about the elders, about helping the Mimitar. Everything the Order has ever given me was intended to help them. Only because it suits their interests to do so, Grius said, starting down the ramp. At least for now. What do you mean? Viola asked. The Order is threatened by the Amar Empire? Grius stopped. The Order, we call them Edheduani, do not fight their own wars. They have the Empire's fight for them, which they achieve by controlling influence of those who rise to power. But the Mimitars were not supposed to collapse so quickly, and it appears that they have also underestimated the impact of the Amarian religion on society. So now they have successfully involved us to reset the balance that is most favorable to them. Viola became angered. So sympathy for the Mimitar has nothing to do with your involvement here at all? The Hedewani are our greatest enemy. That makes them your greatest enemy as well. We cannot sit idly while they selfishly interfere with the history that is yours to decide, no matter how destructive or how often you wish to repeat it. Grius and his 3 companions walked down the ramp as Viola glared at their backs, trying to ignore the tremors jostling in her hands. Use the word yours, she thought. He sees no distinction at all between any of the other races, except for his own. Hey, Grius, Viola called. The 4 Jovians stopped and turned. What does Hedewani mean? The Jovians thought for a moment. There is no translation in your language. For you are a merciful God, the sole devotion of my life, true to the most faithful servants in their time of need. Amen. Voss completed the prayer for the 100th time and listened once more for the answers from above. Hearing none, he started to recite the prayer again, and then stopped as the images of Iana seared through his concentration. He shut his eyes, opening them again to the black shroud over his face, and still could not shake himself free of the torment assaulting his soul. This punishment must be deserved, Faust realized, arcing his back and trying to dismiss the pain radiating from his knees. The loss of my ship, my crew, becoming a captive of the monster Jovian, all of it, rightful punishment for... He could speak of nothing else to warrant this destiny, except for not believing enough in the Grand Admiral Mechioth Sorum's orders to bombard the planet Iana. His actions merely reflected the wishes of Emperor Hadrian, and thus the will of God. Those sinners deserve their fate, and I have no right to question it. The scriptures warn every paladin of this test, that it always comes when the faithful least expects it. My faith will be rewarded, he thought, searching for inner spiritual strength and finding it. For this is a test that I shall not fail. The cloth covering his head was suddenly removed, and the sight before his eyes made him cry in horror. Mimitar rebels, 8 of them, were standing just a few meters away. In the blink of an eye, one of them unsheathed his knife and hurled towards him. It was deflected by a bright flash, repelled at the last moment by a protective energy field. The man broke free of his comrades' attempts to restrain him, and onward he charged, banging his massive fists against the bubble of energy and screaming. Faust could not hear him, nor could he hear anything else. He simply stared back at his attacker, mesmerized by the hatred radiating from him. Who could blame him? Faust thought, cursing himself for allowing the thought to enter his mind. He watched as they argued amongst each other, and then as they pleaded with a slender Jovian who walked to them, the same one who had taken him from the escape pod and rendered him unconscious. This is what you didn't see from space, Faust thought, trying to read their expressions. You just cannot expect these people to believe in a god capable of inciting such profound hatred in men. You just cannot escape these people to believe. No, you can't just expect these people to believe in a god capable of inciting such profound hatred in men. Again, Faust cursed himself. Did he just think that out loud? He closed his eyes, trying to shut the rebels out of his mind. But instead, finding inner peace, he found the images of incinerated cities bellowing out thick black smoke of burning flesh and bone. I must not lose my faith, for this is a test. Faust commanded himself to remain calm, taking comfort in the shield surrounding him. He watched as his captor handed one of the rebels a strange-looking knife, which he accepted and sheathed immediately. 3 Jovian soldiers approached and began distributing weapons to the Mimitar. Words were exchanged within the group, but then they shifted their attention towards something directly behind them. Something nodded their head approvingly. Some nodded their head approvingly. Others shook them in disbelief. 6 of the rebels, now heavily armed with wearing protective armor, ran off to follow the lead of the Jovian soldiers. The other 2 rebels, pilots by the look of it, glared at him one last time before running towards their ship. He watched as the blast doors in the distance slowly opened, and then as the group of rebels filed inside one by one. The Jovian captor remained behind, standing with his hands clasped behind his back and staring with those otherworldly black orbs. The pleasing figure of a female walked out, desperately soothing to his eyes at first, but again he forcibly dismissed the thought as another secular distraction. The two spoke briefly, and then the female turned. Foss noted that she was holding something in her hand, and was overwhelmed with the horror once he recognized what it was. My God, why have you forsaken me? Foss gasped as the woman, with her angelic face and demonic eyes, approached and kneeled so close that he could feel her warm breath. Suddenly his ears felt though a stone was rolled from them, and he could hear once more. Commodore Acridon, the woman said, placing the glaive collar around his neck and switching it on. The points of 6 needles pressed lightly into his skin. It's time we discussed your sins. And we are going to stop there today. We're actually halfway done, guys. We are at page 87 out of 169. That is the conclusion of chapters 1 through 4. So I probably tomorrow, assuming that, we don't have something even bigger to discuss, we can hit up the second half of this chronicle, or whatever you want to call it, this novella. Yeah. Whew. Yes, this is, yeah, exactly. That's why I said that. We're at page 87 of 169. Yeah. That's why they call this a novella and not a book, and not a chronicle. But yeah, thank you guys for hanging out, man. Like, I've been meaning to do this for a long time. I promised Seeds that I would do this. I can't even remember what it was, but like we had planned to do this. Oh, it was the day that like Sissy updated like right as I went live. What time tomorrow? Same time. So tomorrow we're going to not do what we did this time. So we'll start at the normal time, which is 4 hours ago. It would be like CCP to throw a lower wrench at you halfway through. I agree, it would. But also, I mean, like, we are standing at the precipice of things happening, so I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow being Tuesday, we do have other things to talk about. But we'll do our best to get through it. Just when you go to bed? Well, 4 hours ago? Well, again, so these VODs all go on the YouTube. These are going to be broken into chapters and released. And tomorrow, after the stream, we'll roll directly into a premiere for a video. So until then, and I think that the video is going to be the Intaki video, like when we talked about the Intaki last week. But make sure to go back to my lore speedrun video. I'm glad that you guys enjoyed this. Oh, no. Stuff is going to happen. I mean, like, stuff has already been happening. Arazith. Like, literally, things happened on Friday. Not really following the story, but it's fun. So, I will say this. This novella is designed to kind of be confusing because it's sort of out of time. And then, to not spoil too much, in the end, you figure out what this has actually been a story about the whole time, if that makes sense. The key here is that this character, the reason why this is so important, what happened Friday? The state took Syndicate. Wasn't this Friday? Hold on. What was the 22nd? Oh, shit. That was a week ago. Fuck. Okay. Never mind. Oh. Time has no meaning. Hold on. Where's chat? There it is. Yeah, so as I said earlier, I think that the next shoe to drop is going to be, well, as soon as, I mean, like, you should be able to go listen to it right away. The next shoe to drop is basically set up, because if you see during this stuff, during these, the events that have been focusing on the Caldari, we've seen Khanid and Lydai working together to survey more candidate systems for transmuters, and lunchtime doubly so. And also we have the nuclear reactors or whatever being given to how Sorum gifts fusion reactors to Amatar Mandate. And we didn't get to go into this today because this is such, there's so much to this. This little note right here, really, like, in order to explain it, I have to go into, hold on. In order to explain this line right here, like, I don't even know how far back to go at this point. I started in 2011 when the Amatar governor was made governor. But like, this whole thing implicates the Chalcade incident. It's all about Tetramon. Like, I have to go, like, it has to do with Tetramon potentially. So the history of Tetramon, how they got kicked out, how they got brought back in. Chalcade, the Khanid Duke, who ended up being an Equilibrium of Mankind traitor. That whole arc with the Dread attacks, which was predicated on by a tour of the Amatar Mandate by Ardashapur and Kattis, and this very clear and growing partnership between the Sorum House and House Ardashapur through Saint Tetramon, all while House Sorum is focused on more and more like foot soldiers and paramilitary corporation, groups like the so there's the Silver Hand, which I think is actually Ardashapur. I can't remember. See, there's so much to this. So the point is that, like, as the different empire, or when Kattis kind of said that each of the holders are responsible for their own territory, that really did kind of make Sorum and Ardashapur begin to align with each other. And of course, the assumption of Kattis to power also meant a change of guard of who was in charge of Sorum and Ardashapur, because all of the heirs were killed. Yeah. So it all goes back to this right here. The course of the wide-ranging Address of the Faithful on the occasion of the 3rd anniversary of her coronation, Empress Kattis I has declared the end of the so-called Hydrian Decree and ordered a rearrangement of territorial military fiefs overseen by the royal houses of the Privy Council. The Hydrian Decree was a ruling blah, 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 after the Khador incident. However, most sweeping announcements concerning the territorial military organization of the Amar Empire under imperial throne and royal houses. Empress Kattis I has promulgated her full doctrine in a work called Pax Ilkitse Hido, or Peace of the Two Swords, but her address picked out key elements for her vision of the future by the Amar Empire. The Amar Empire has been divided into imperial military circuits that are to be overseen by the royal houses and Privy Council. Throne World's military circuit is Throne Worlds and Norgo Imperial Zone. Ardashapur military circuit has Lower Domain, Derelict, and Lower Rebel provinces. Kador military circuit is Kador and Upper Genesis. Khanid military circuit is Khanid and Aridia. Korazor military circuit is Korazor and Lower Genesis. Sorum family circuit, Upper Domain, Bleaklands, Divoolej, and Upper Rebel provinces. So you can see, like, these two guys' domains are very complementary to each other. Aridia was where Khanid was removing assets more towards the core around the time that they were surveying the equipment. Khanid also has very close ties to Lydai. They make their missile systems. Tashmerkon Military Circuit, Tashmerkon, Jakme Kashik Development Zone, and Providence Marches. So Tashmerkon, their territory is one of the smallest territories, and subsequently also involves a lot of, nullsec stuff. The 6 royal heirs are designated sword marshals. Further outlined. The sword marshals, that of royal heirs, are expected to provide for the defense of territorial and military fiefs personally and through their own vassals and subjects. The holders of the territories falling under each of the new imperial military circuits are instructed to take all steps as necessary to ensure adequate defense of their own holdings and comply with the lawful commands of their sword marshals and liege lords. However, House Artichoper appears to have successfully... Hold on, actually. A number of large... The overall import of the Pax Ikitse, though, is a significant reorganization of territorial holdings across the Amar Empire. A large number of systems with unclear lines of command and feudal responsibility have been allocated so that all lines of feudal and military authority flows from a single royal house and through them to the imperial throne. As a result of this reorganization, the reallocation of the previously confused territories of Iridia, Bleaklands, Divoolej, and Genesis. So that would be Kador, Corazor, Sorum, Khanid, and Artichoper. Holy shit, that's every single noble house except for Tashmerkon. Imagine that. It would appear that House Kador, Khanid, Corazor, and Sorum are many beneficiaries of this shakeup. However, House Artichoper appears to have successfully resisted growing calls by some to break up its rule over the Amatar Mandate and held on to its domain region holdings. It's been suggested that House Artichoper's repeated successful defense of the Amatar Mandate from Triglavian and Blood Raider assaults strengthened their position. The more mercantile-oriented House Tashmerkon has also acquired control over a small development zone in the prestigious domain region. The main losers of this are a large number of minor houses who have been placed unambiguously under vassalage of one of the 6 royal houses, where previously the position was unclear due to a webbing of pre-existing fiefs and feudal charters. So, yeah, they kind of position themselves, and then this is before they built the Stargate to Stain. This is also before Chakade's rebellion. So when we talked about, or when at the beginning of the show, when we were talking about like the different territories and how the capitals are being given to Tashmerkon and, all that kind of stuff. This is why, because they actually have their territory divided at this point. And so they're kind of working semi-independently. Good news. Take the Matar Special Forces. Bad news. Leaving you a shaky gal spy who has a violent come down, is betrayed by her fed for not people's nonsense. Bye! Yeah, I mean, shoot, what was it? There was another story. Fuck. There was a plot recently that I identified as basically resurrecting Viola's story of like the lone Galente that no one believes. I don't remember what it was though. Oh well. I remember even straight up saying like, oh yeah, they stole Viola's backstory and just reused it. But now I can't remember what it was. Yeah. So thank you guys for coming. I gotta go. So join Eve with that link. Give me money if you want to via Patreon with this link. Come help us maximize player engagement with EVE Online, and or help us with our war deck, and or join for faction warfare. We could definitely use more, and we are recruiting and are happy to help you. And thank you especially to Arydanika for being a mod and a producer. She finally accepted that title, so I'm going to call her that. I'm very thankful for that. And also, thanks to Abyssus, Arydanika the Queen, BlackRoseNoble, Dajat Lemmont, Drake, Golden Age Stories, MidnightSpaceMonkey, NotJustFun, Seedsaplenty, Serenalen with No Eyes, Syliana Vel'ash, Talking in Stations, Nephilim, Grendel, and Zaul Nex, as well as my Immortal patrons, Ebo and Rid, who's somehow not gotten on this list yet. But also, sorry, before I leave, contests. Make sure to go and comment on the speedrun video if you haven't already for your chance at 200 Plex. And also, I've sent out emails to everyone who participated in the Build a Gate competition. I'm having all of them give me their choices. A lot of them have sent it back already. So I think today I'm going to go back through, because the problem is I have to wait. Like, you know, I can't let person 3 get their choice until I know what person 2's choice is. So if you haven't responded yet, make sure you do so that way I can do the giveaways. And otherwise, yeah, I will be hopefully back tomorrow to talk about either current events, more of the Chronicle or the novella, or who knows what else. But until then, I've been Ashtarothi. I've been playing this game since 2010, talking about it since 2012, and I'm here to put Eve into context for you, my fellow Empyreans. Thank you all so much for coming and hanging out. A lot of people would suspect that not a lot of people would want to sit here and go through all of this lore, but I think that together we're proving them wrong. So thank you guys for your support, your views, your likes, your shares, your comments. It means so much, both to me, the channel, and all of the people whose lives are touched by my work, by helping make EVE a better place, by increasing player literacy of EVE Online, because that's the whole point. That's what we're all here for. So without further ado, I've been Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden, and I'll see you in space.